She folded the doctor's letter in half, then in half again, pressing her thumb along the crease until the paper almost tore, and then she walked straight back into her shop, tied on her apron, and helped the next customer without a single word about what she had just been told. That was Clara Whitmore. That was the woman this town destroyed with a rumor, and the woman one man chose to love anyway. If you believe a person's worth is bigger than what the world decides for them, subscribe right now, drop the name of your city in the comments, and stay until the very last word. This story has a long way to go. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Clara Whitmore knew it was bad before she even broke the wax seal, because Dr. Henley never sent letters. In the 3 years she had lived in Red Hollow, Montana, the man communicated the way all frontier doctors did, face-to-face, blunt, and without apology. A letter meant he had written the words down because he did not trust himself to say them without looking away. She read it standing at the back counter of her shop, between a stack of account ledgers and a bolt of dark wool fabric she had been saving for the Henderson family's winter order. She read it once. Then she folded it, put it in her apron pocket, and went back to work. That was her first mistake, some people later said. Not falling apart. Not giving the town the tears they were expecting. Clara Whitmore walked back onto the main floor of Whitmore Trading and answered every question, filled every order, smiled at every customer who came through that door, and she did it all with a doctor's verdict folded against her hip, telling her that the life she had quietly hoped for might never come. The letter said she was likely infertile. It said the examination had revealed complications. It said the word unlikely 3 times in 4 sentences, as if one use of the word was not already enough to collapse a woman's world. Dr. Henley had written it gently in the cramped, careful handwriting of a man who understood that ink on paper could do permanent damage, and yet, gently or not, the damage was done. Clara was 28 years old. Her husband, Thomas Whitmore, had died 14 months earlier from a fever that moved through his lungs like fire through dry grass, fast, total, and without mercy. He had left her the trading shop a modest set of debts, and a grief so deep she had not yet found the bottom of it. And now, 14 months after burying the man she loved, she was reading a letter that told her the family she had imagined, the children she had already named in the quiet of her own heart, might never exist. She folded that letter into her apron pocket, and she went back to work. By Friday, the town already knew. This was the thing about Red Hollow that Clara had never fully adjusted to, even after 3 years, the way news moved. Not like water which found its own path. Like fire, with direction, with appetite, and with the particular cruelty of something that fed on what it touched. She never learned exactly who talked first. She suspected it was one of the women in Dr. Henley's waiting room that Tuesday. Someone who had seen Clara come out of his private office with that particular careful blankness that a person puts on their face when they are not ready to feel something yet. Someone had seen. Someone had guessed. And someone had talked. By Sunday service, the whispers were already organized into sentences. Clara heard the first one while she was adjusting her gloves before walking into the church. 2 women. Margaret Holt and her sister Bess were standing near the door, and they did not lower their voices quite fast enough. "She can't have children," Margaret said. The doctor confirmed it. "Poor Thomas," Bess replied. "He never knew." Clara stopped walking. She stood on the step for 3 full seconds. She counted them later when she was replaying the moment alone, and she felt something move through her chest that she could not name. It was not quite anger. It was not quite sorrow. It was something older than both, something that lived in the part of a woman that absorbs cruelty quietly because she has learned that displaying pain only invites more. She opened the church door and walked inside. She sat in her usual pew. She did not cry. Margaret Holt, for what it was worth, had the grace to look embarrassed when she sat down 3 rows back and found Clara already there, spine straight, hands folded, eyes forward. But embarrassed was not the same as sorry. And sorry, Clara had already learned, was not the same as quiet. The whispers grew. Within 2 weeks, the story had traveled from the church to the general store to the saloon, and in each location it picked up new details, new interpretations, new cruelties dressed in the clothing of concern. She heard that women were saying she was incomplete. She heard that men were saying no rancher with sense would tie himself to a woman with nothing to offer in the long run. She heard that someone she never confirmed who had told a widower named Gerald Crane that he ought to reconsider his interest in Clara because a man his age deserves a real family, not a woman who's already at the end of her road. Gerald Crane had been coming into Whitmore trading for 6 months, buying small things, a tin of tobacco, a spool of thread. He did not need a box of matches he could have gotten from the general store for half the price. Clara had noticed. She had not discouraged it. He stopped coming in the week after that conversation, whatever it was, wherever it happened. Clara noticed that too. She noticed everything. She just did not say anything about it. That was the pattern of her life that spring. Noticing, absorbing, folding the hurt into smaller and smaller shapes, pressing it flat until it fit somewhere it would not show. She worked 12 hours a day. She kept meticulous records. She repaired clothing for ranch families who could not afford a seamstress, and she charged them almost nothing. She delivered firewood to old Mrs. Patton 3 times that winter, when the woman's nephew failed to show up, dragging the sled herself through knee-deep snow without being asked. She was by every visible measure an extraordinary woman, and the town had decided she was worthless. The first person to say it to her face was a woman named Doris Callahan. Doris ran the boarding house on the east end of Main Street, and she had known Clara since Thomas was alive. She was not a cruel woman by nature, Clara had always believed that, but she was a woman who confused bluntness with honesty and had never learned that some truths spoken at the wrong time in the wrong way became weapons without meaning to. It was a Wednesday afternoon. Clara had come to drop off a mended tablecloth for the boarding house dining room. She handed it over at the door, and Doris took it, shook it out, looked at it with approval, and then said without transition, without warning, "Clara, honey, I'm going to say this because I think someone ought to." Clara felt her shoulders tighten. "All right. You're a capable woman. You always have been." Doris folded the tablecloth over her arm. "But capable only goes so far when a man is thinking about his future. And men around here, good men, they want children. They want a legacy. You need to start thinking about what kind of life is actually available to you now. Because if you spend the next 10 years waiting for something that isn't coming, you're going to wake up old and alone and—" "Doris." Clara's voice was quiet. Not sharp, not angry. Just quiet in the way that a door is quiet when it closes. "I'm just saying. I know what you're saying." Clara met the older woman's eyes without flinching. "I appreciate that you mean it kindly. And I'm telling you with equal kindness that I am not interested in spending my life in the version of it that other people have decided is appropriate for me." Doris blinked. "Good afternoon," Clara said, and she walked back down the steps across the muddy street and into her shop, where she locked the front door. Went to the back room, sat down on the floor behind the counter and cried for approximately 12 minutes. Then she stood up, washed her face, unlocked the door, and went back to work. It was in that season of quiet survival, that long grinding stretch of days where Clara was performing strength, she did not always feel that she made a decision. She decided she was done waiting for people's opinions to change. She would not perform grief for the town's comfort. She would not make herself smaller to fit the version of her they had already decided on. She would not stop building her life simply because other people had looked at her circumstances and concluded that her story was already finished. She started taking on more business. She reached out to 3 ranches she had never worked with before, offering to manage their account books for a modest fee. She expanded the trading shop's inventory, taking a calculated risk on a supply of tools and dry goods that Red Hollow had always ordered from the next town over. She hired a part-time assistant, a 15-year-old girl named Rosie Dunbar, whose family needed the income, and she taught Rosie everything she knew about Ledger's inventory and how to deal with difficult customers without losing your composure. She was building something. Not because she had stopped hurting, but because she refused to let the hurt be the last thing she built. The morning Wyatt Dawson rode into Red Hollow was the kind of morning Clara barely noticed because she was already deep into a quarterly inventory count and had been awake since 4 o'clock arguing with a column of numbers that refused to reconcile. She heard the new arrival, the way she heard most things that spring as background noise. Someone at the general store mentioned a man had bought the old Hargrove Ranch property out on the eastern ridge. Someone else said he had paid cash for it, which meant either he was wealthy or reckless, and in Frontier, Montana, those two things were not always easy to tell apart. Rosie mentioned that he was tall. Someone at the saloon apparently said he was quiet, not unfriendly, just not interested in talking for the sake of it. Clara filed all of this away and went back to her numbers. She was not looking for anything. She was not hoping for anything. She had with great deliberate effort gotten herself to a place where she was building a life that did not depend on someone else arriving in it. And then 3 days after Wyatt Dawson rode into town, he came into Whitmore Trading. He came in on a Thursday just past mid-morning when the shop was quiet enough that Clara could hear the specific sound of the door, the particular weight of it, the way the bell rang differently, depending on whether someone pushed or pulled, and she could tell before she looked up that this was a person who opened doors deliberately. Not tentatively, not forcefully, just deliberately, like a man who knew where he was going. She looked up from behind the counter. How was tall the way Rosie had said, with the particular kind of build that came from actual physical labor rather than performed strength. His coat was worn, but clean. His hat was in his hand before he'd even fully stepped through the door, which Clara noticed because most men in Red Hollow kept their hats on indoors as a kind of assertion, and this one had taken his off as automatically as breathing. "Morning," he said. His voice was low, unhurried. "I was told this was the place for supplies and honest accounting." "Both are available here," Clara said. "What do you need?" "Both," he said simply. Clara set down her pen. This was how it began. Not with music, not with lightning, not with any of the things that people who tell love stories like to insert into the beginning so that the audience understands what they're watching. It began with a man who took his hat off when he came inside, and a woman who had already decided her story wasn't over, and the very specific silence of two people assessing each other without the usual performance. "I'm Wyatt Dawson," he said. "I bought the Hargrove place." "I heard," Clara said. "I'm Clara Whitmore. This is my shop." Whitmore Trading. He looked around once briefly with the practiced eye of a man who could read a room without appearing to. "Your late husband's." "Mine," she said, not harshly, just precisely. He met her eyes. "Yours," he agreed. He came back on Saturday. He needed account books, 3 of them large format with sewn bindings. Clara had exactly those in the back stockroom, and she brought them out and set them on the counter, and he opened the first one and looked at the paper quality and the binding and then looked at her. "These are good," he said. "I only carry good ones," she said. He bought all 3 paid without negotiating the price, and then stood for a moment before leaving. "The ranch accounts are a complete disaster," he said in the same tone someone might use to report the weather. "Previous owner let them go for 2 years before selling. I've got records that make no sense, and debts I'm still untangling. I don't suppose you do that kind of work." Clara looked at him for a moment. "I do exactly that kind of work," she said. He nodded once, as if that was the answer he had expected. "Monday morning." 7 o'clock, she said. He put his hat back on. 7 o'clock, he confirmed. And then he was gone, and Clara stood at the counter for a long moment after the door closed, and she felt something she had not felt in a very long time, the specific quiet electricity of a thing beginning. She told herself it was professional interest. She went back to her ledgers. She did not entirely convince herself. Tag. Monday morning, 7 o'clock. She arrived at the Hargrove Ranch, Dawson Ranch. Now she corrected herself with her own kit. 3 sharpened pencils, a bottle of good ink, her personal ledger reference guide, and the particular kind of organized patience that came from years of untangling other people's financial disasters. What she found was worse than she expected. The previous owner, a man named Hargrove, had kept records, the way some men kept promises sporadically optimistically and with a complete disregard for accuracy. There were receipts stuffed into a coffee tin. There were purchase records written on the backs of envelopes. There was a ledger from 1881 that someone had used as a coaster, leaving a perfect ring stain across an entire column of figures. Clara set everything out on the large table in the ranch office, sorted it into rough categories, and began to build order from the wreckage. Wyatt brought her coffee at 7:30 without being asked. He set it on the edge of the table where it would not touch her papers, which Clara also noticed. He sat across from her and answered questions when she asked them, and did not interrupt when she was working through something, and did not fill silence with unnecessary noise. When she pointed to a column of figures and said, "These don't make sense. What was Hargrove doing with this supplier in November?" Wyatt pulled out a folded paper from his shirt pocket and laid it on the table. "I found that in the barn," he said. "It's a side agreement he apparently made without recording it properly." "Of course it is," Clara said. Something about the flatness of her voice made him smile just slightly, just at the corner of his mouth. "You've done this before." "Everyone thinks their disaster is unique," Clara said, writing in the ledger. "The shape is always the same." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "What's the shape?" She looked up. Someone stopped paying attention, and the longer they ignored it, the bigger the problem grew. And by the time they were forced to look at it, the problem was so large they couldn't see anything else. Wyatt held her gaze. "You're not just talking about accounts." Clara looked back down at the ledger. "I'm always talking about accounts." But she could feel him still watching her, and she was not entirely sure she was right. He came to the shop the following Thursday. Not for supplies, not for accounting help. He came in at mid-morning with no stated purpose, bought a tin of coffee and a newspaper he probably did not need, and stood at the counter for 20 minutes talking about a problem he was having with the eastern fence line. Clara listened. She asked 2 questions. She offered one practical suggestion about how to deal with the cattle supplier he was in dispute with. He thanked her. He left. He came back the following Thursday, and the Thursday after that. By the 4th Thursday, Rosie had started looking at Clara with the particular expression of a 15-year-old who believes she is being very subtle, which meant she was being completely obvious. "He comes every week," Rosie said during a quiet moment after Wyatt had left. "He's a regular customer," Clara said. "He bought a jar of honey today," Rosie said. "We both know he didn't need a jar of honey." Clara did not respond to this. "Miss Whitmore," Rosie said with the earnest urgency of a teenager who has decided something important must be said. "He looks at you the same way my father looks at my mother. Like you're the answer to a question he hasn't asked yet." Clara set down her pen very carefully. "Rosie," she said, "finish the inventory count." Rosie finished the inventory count, but Clara stood at the counter for a long time after that, turning a pencil between her fingers, and she thought about Rosie's words. The answer to a question he hasn't asked yet, and she felt the particular fear of someone who has been hurt enough to recognize hope when it starts growing, and to understand exactly how much it can cost. She was thinking about the letter. Always underneath everything else, she was thinking about the letter. She had not told anyone about it. Not in full. Not in the way that would allow another person to understand the complete weight of what Dr. Henley had written on that Tuesday afternoon in his careful, cramped handwriting. The town had gotten the rumor, the stripped-down, distorted version, but they had not gotten her. Her private calculations. The way she lay awake some nights and ran the math on a future that was different from the one she had expected, adding up the things she still had, and trying to be honest with herself about whether they were enough. She was not sure they were enough. She was not sure a man like Wyatt Dawson, careful, grounded, clearly the kind of man who thought about the future in a serious way, would look at what she could and couldn't offer and decide it was enough either. And here was the thing that terrified her most. She was starting to care whether he did. She had promised herself she would not do that. She had built the last 14 months on the architecture of self-sufficiency, on the understanding that she was the only person she could absolutely count on, and that anything beyond that was a gift that could be taken back without warning. She had stopped hoping for a certain kind of future. She had made peace with it, or something close enough to peace that she could function. And then a man came into her shop and took his hat off without thinking about it, and said "yours" when she corrected him about the shop, and sat across from her at a disaster of a desk and watched her work as if he was watching something worth watching. and she felt the architecture begin to shift. It was a Saturday in late April when the town began to speak to Wyatt directly. She did not witness the first conversation. She only heard about it afterward from Rosie, who had heard it from her mother, who had been standing outside the feed store when it happened. A man named Len Crawford, cattle rancher town council member, the particular kind of person who believed that speaking his opinion aloud was a form of community service, had stopped Wyatt on the street. "Dawson," Len had said, "you've been spending a fair amount of time at Whitmore trading." "I have," Wyatt had said, not defensively, just factually. "Clara Whitmore is a capable woman," Len said in the specific tone that people use when they are about to contradict what they've just said. "But you should know, and I'm telling you this as someone who has your best interests at heart, she can't have children. The doctor confirmed it months ago. A man building a ranch, building a future, you need to think carefully about what you're walking into." The story, as Rosie's mother had reported it, was that Wyatt Dawson had listened to all of this without interruption. He had waited until Len Crawford was fully finished. And then he had said very quietly, "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Crawford. I'll take it under advisement." And then he had walked away. Rosie told Clara this story with the breathless delivery of someone reporting excellent news. Clara listened to the whole thing with her arms crossed and her expression careful. "He didn't defend me," Clara said. "He didn't agree with him either," Rosie pointed out. "That's not the same thing." "Miss Whitmore." Rosie looked at her with the particular exasperation of youth in the face of adult caution. "Not everyone has to fight a battle out loud to be fighting it." Clara thought about that for a long time after Rosie went home. She thought about it at dinner. She thought about it washing her face before bed. She thought about it at 4 in the morning when she was awake with the accounts and the silence of an empty house that felt too big for one person. Not everyone has to fight a battle out loud to be fighting it. She was not sure she believed that yet, but she was starting to wonder if she should. He came in on Thursday the same as always. This time he did not buy anything. He came in, stood at the counter, and looked at her directly in the particular way he had, not the way men usually looked at her, which was either with pity or assessment, but with a kind of straightforward attentiveness, as if she was a problem worth understanding rather than solving. "I heard Len Crawford talk to you," Clara said. She was not interested in circling around it. Wyatt nodded. "He did. And I said what I said." "Which wasn't much," she pointed out. "It was enough," he said. She looked at him. "Was it?" He held her gaze. "Clara." Her name in his mouth had a particular quality, not soft exactly, but deliberate. Like he had decided to say it and meant to. "I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly." "I generally do," she said. "Do you actually believe that what Crawford said to me, what any of them have said, changes what I see when I come in here?" She was quiet for a moment. Then, "I think it might change what you do about it, even if it doesn't change what you see." He was quiet too then. He looked down at the counter between them, and she could see him choosing his next words with care. "I grew up watching my father make decisions based on what other people told him was practical," he said finally. "He married a woman he didn't love because she came from a good family and had the right connections. He spent 30 years in a marriage that was technically correct and completely empty." He looked back up at her. "I made a decision a long time ago that I wasn't going to do that. I wasn't going to build a life based on what looks right from the outside. I was going to pay attention to what is actually right. For me." He paused. "You understand what I'm saying?" Clara understood exactly what he was saying. She was terrified of it. "You should know," she said, because she was not a woman who let fear keep her from saying the true thing. That the doctor's report wasn't. It wasn't simple, it was uncertain. Not impossible, but unlikely. And I don't... She stopped. Started again. "I don't want you building something based on an exception that might not happen." "I'm not building something based on an exception," he said. "Then what are you building it on?" He looked at her for a long moment, and the afternoon light came through the shop windows, and the street sounds filtered in from outside, and Clara stood behind her counter in her shop, the one she had refused to lose, the one she had built from the wreckage of a grief that should have broken her, and she waited. "You," he said. "I'm building it on you." The word landed in the room like something dropped from a height, not loud but with weight. With impact. Clara held his gaze. She was not going to cry. She was absolutely not going to cry. She said, "That is a considerable risk." And he said, "I know." And neither of them looked away. That night alone in her house, Clara took the doctor's letter out of the drawer where she kept it. She unfolded it. She read it one more time, all the way through the careful handwriting, the gentle sentences, the word unlikely, 3 times in 4 sentences. Then she folded it up, went to the fireplace, and held the corner of it against the flame. She watched it burn until there was nothing left. She was not burning hope. She was burning the part of herself that had let other people's certainty become her own. The diagnosis was real. The uncertainty was real. The fear was real. But so was this. Clara Whitmore was 28 years old. She had survived a husband's death and a town's cruelty and a doctor's verdict and 14 months of quiet, deliberate rebuilding. She had organized chaos, kept her accounts square, helped her neighbors survive winter, and hired a 15-year-old girl who said things that turned out to be true. She was not a woman whose story was finished. She was a woman whose story was only now becoming worth telling. And somewhere across town, a man named Wyatt Dawson was sitting in a ranch house that needed work, looking at account books that were finally beginning to make sense, building something from broken ground. The same as her. Exactly the same as her. The ash from the letter drifted up the chimney and was gone. And Clara Whitmore sat in front of the fire for a long time, hands in her lap, and felt for the first time in over a year like herself. Not the broken version, not the rumored version, not the town's version, her own. The morning after Clara burned the letter, she woke up feeling lighter than she had in 14 months. That feeling lasted exactly until she opened the shop. Margaret Holt was waiting at the door before Clara had even turned the key, standing there with her hands folded and her mouth already set in the particular shape it took when she had decided she was about to do something charitable. "Clara," she said, "I need to speak with you." "The shop opens at 8, Margaret," Clara said, and turned the key. "I'm not here as a customer." Margaret followed her inside without being invited, which told Clara everything about the nature of the conversation that was coming. "I'm here as someone who cares about you, as a friend." Clara set her bag on the counter. She did not turn around. "All right." "People are talking," Margaret said, "about you and Wyatt Dawson, and I think as a friend that someone needs to tell you that what you're doing is not fair to him." Now Clara turned around. "I'm sorry. You're letting him get attached to something that can't last." Margaret's voice had the trembling quality of a woman who had convinced herself she was being brave. "He's a good man, Clara. He's building a ranch. He needs a real future, a real family. And you, I know it's not your fault. I know what the doctor said, but you need to think about what you're doing to him by allowing this to continue. It's selfish, and I think deep down you know it." The word landed exactly where Margaret had aimed it. Selfish. Clara looked at her for a long moment. The silence stretched between them like a wire pulled too tight. "Margaret," she said finally, "let me ask you something. When you came here this morning, did you think about what this conversation might do to me? Did you consider what it costs a person to hear the word selfish applied to the only thing that's made her feel like herself in over a year?" Margaret opened her mouth, closed it. "Because if you had thought about that," Clara said, "and you came anyway, then I'm not sure you know what the word friend actually means. And if you didn't think about it at all..." She picked up her ledger and opened it. "Then we've been calling each other friends for 3 years, based on a misunderstanding." Margaret left. She left quickly without another word, and the bell above the door rang sharp and clean behind her. Clara stood at the counter. Her hands were steady. She was almost surprised by the steadiness of her hands, the evenness of her breathing. A year ago, that conversation would have sent her to the back room floor. Today she had stood at the counter and said the true thing, and let Margaret carry the discomfort out with her. Something had changed when she burned that letter. She was not entirely sure what it was yet, but she could feel it. Rosie came in at 8:30 and immediately read the room with the accuracy that Clara had come to depend on. "What happened?" "Nothing," Clara said. Rosie looked at the door, looked at Clara. Margaret Holt. Rosie. I'm just going to start the inventory. That's a good decision, Clara said. But Rosie paused at the door to the back room and turned back. For what it's worth, Miss, everyone who comes in here and tries to tell you who to love is doing it because your happiness makes them feel something they can't explain. And people who can't explain their feelings usually decide you're the problem. She disappeared into the back room. Clara stared at the empty doorway. She thought that girl is going to be remarkable when she grows up, and then she went back to her accounts. Wyatt came in that Thursday the same as always, and this time he did not stand at the counter. He walked in, looked at her, and said, "Have dinner with me tonight, at the ranch." Clara set down her pen. That would give this town a great deal to discuss. It already has a great deal to discuss, he said. Doesn't seem to be doing much damage to either of us. It hasn't escalated yet, she said. Clara. He said her name the same way he always did, deliberate, decided. I'm asking you to have dinner with me. That's all I'm asking. You can ride back before dark. Rosie can close up. She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at Rosie, who was pretending to be completely absorbed in a bolt of fabric and not listening to every word. Rosie, she said, can you close up tonight? Rosie did not look up. Absolutely. Clara looked back at Wyatt. 7 o'clock, she said. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but something adjacent to one. 7 o'clock. Clock, he agreed. She arrived at the ranch at 7, and what struck her first was not the house or the land or any of the things that a woman was supposed to notice about a man's home. What struck her was that he had clearly cleaned. Not because the ranch was spotless. It wasn't. But because there were specific signs of effort. The table had been wiped down carefully. There was a cloth on it that had not been there the 2 times she had come for accounting work, and the coffee tin was sitting in a different place than usual, moved aside to make room for actual plates. He had tried. That was what undid her slightly. Not the grand gesture, the small one. The specific practical evidence that he had looked at his ordinary space and decided it mattered how it looked to her. They ate together and talked the way they always talked about the ranch, about business, about the accounts that were beginning to finally make sense. But then the food was gone, and the talking shifted the way it does when 2 people stop negotiating the surface of a conversation and start moving toward the ground underneath it. Tell me about Thomas, he said. She looked up. Why? Because you almost never mention him. And I think that means he matters more than you're willing to say. She was quiet for a moment. Then, he was kind. That's the first thing. Not kind as a performance kind, as a reflex. He'd stop mid-sentence to help someone who dropped something. He used to apologize to horses when he startled them. She paused. He was also stubborn as a post and completely hopeless with numbers, which is why the shop's records were a disaster when he got sick and couldn't manage them anymore. She stopped again. I kept the books for the last 4 months of his life. He thought I was helping him. Actually, I was taking over because if I hadn't, we'd have been bankrupt before he was gone. He knew, Wyatt said. She looked at him. How would you know that? Because a man who apologizes to horses knows when his wife is carrying more than she's admitting, he said. He knew. And he let you do it, which means he trusted you completely. Clara felt something move through her chest, unexpected, sharp, and strangely like relief. He did, she said quietly. He trusted me completely. That's what you lost, Wyatt said. Not just him, the person you were when someone trusted you that much. She stared at him. No one, not once in 14 months, not Rosie or Margaret or Dr. Henley or anyone had said that, had identified exactly that, the specific shape of the loss underneath the loss. Yes, she said. Her voice came out rougher than she intended. That's exactly what I lost. The room was very quiet. I'm not Thomas, Wyatt said. I'm not trying to be. But I want you to know something, Clara. I trust your judgment more than I trust almost anyone else's I've ever met. That's not a small thing for me to say. He held her gaze. And I'm not saying it to replace what you had. I'm saying it because it's true, and you deserve to hear a true thing. She pressed her lips together. She was absolutely categorically not going to cry at his table. "You," she said after a moment, "are going to be very difficult to argue with." He smiled then, and a real one, the full version, and she realized she had not seen it before, not completely. It changed his face, made him look younger, made him look like a man who had also, somewhere along the way, decided to stop letting other people define his limits. "Good," he said. She rode back before dark. She held the reins loosely and let the horse find her own pace, and thought about what he had said the entire way home. The person you were when someone trusted you that much. Yes, she thought. That's exactly right. The town escalated the following week. She should have expected it. She had expected it abstractly, the way you expect weather you know is coming without knowing exactly when it will arrive. But the specific form it took was worse than she had anticipated. It started at the church social on Saturday evening. Clara went because she had always gone, because she refused to reorganize her life around the town's discomfort, and because old Mrs. Patton would look for her and be disappointed if she wasn't there. She arrived, found Mrs. Patton, and was in the middle of a conversation about the woman's garden when she felt the room change. Not loudly, just the particular quality of a gathering. When attention shifts, when eyes move, when people start having conversations while watching something else. She turned around. Charles Whittaker had just walked in. Clara had known Charles Whittaker for 2 years, and in that time she had developed a precise, well-reasoned, and entirely private dislike of him. He was wealthy, genuinely, substantially wealthy. The kind of wealthy that came from 2 generations of land accumulation, and he wore that wealth the way some men wore a weapon, visibly, deliberately, as a constant reminder of what he could do if he chose to. He had shown an interest in Clara after Thomas died, not romantic exactly, but proprietary, as if her situation presented an opportunity, and he was considering whether to take it. Clara had declined every invitation, turned away every overture, and done it with such seamless politeness that Whittaker had never been able to accuse her of being rude. He had not forgiven her for it. She watched him work the room with the ease of a man who had never once doubted his own welcome, and then his eyes found her, and he smiled the smile of someone who has decided this evening is going to be useful. He crossed the room to her. "Clara," he said warmly, "you look well." "Charles," she said, "I hear you've been spending time with the new man, Dawson." He said the name with a particular neutrality that was not neutral at all. "Good that someone's keeping an eye on those ranch accounts. Lord knows they need help." "The accounts are in fine shape," she said. "I'm sure they are." He picked up a cup from the refreshment table beside them and turned to face the room as if they were having a casual conversation, which meant he was about to say something he did not want to look her in the eye for. "I've been talking to some of the other ranchers. There's a concern, Clara, about Dawson's financial position. The cash he paid for that property there are questions about where it came from. And a man with a questionable financial history, combined with ranch accounts that are being managed by someone with, shall we say, a personal interest in his well-being." "Stop," Clara said. He stopped. He looked at her, faintly surprised. She had never interrupted him before. "I know what you're doing, Charles," she said, keeping her voice low and even. "You're building a story. First you question his finances. Then you question my objectivity. Then you suggest that any problems with the ranch are connected to my management of the books. And by the time you're finished, you've destroyed both of us while appearing to be concerned." She looked at him directly. "I want you to understand something. Whatever you're planning, whatever you think you can do. I have kept records of everything, every account, every transaction, every number. And I will put those records in front of anyone you send to look at them, because there is nothing there that can't survive scrutiny." She set down her cup. "Good evening, Charles." She walked back across the room to Mrs. Patton, who had watched the entire exchange with bright, sharp eyes. "That man," Mrs. Patton said, "has been trouble since before you were born." "I know," Clara said. "You handled it well." "I handled the part I could see," Clara said. "I'm more worried about the part he's planning that I can't." Mrs. Patton squeezed her hand. "You're not alone in this, child." Clara looked at the old woman, at the firm grip of her thin fingers. the steadiness in her face, and felt the particular startling weight of being seen by someone who had known her long enough to mean it. "Thank you," she said, and she meant it completely. She told Wyatt about Whittaker the following Monday. She had debated it. She had considered keeping it to herself, managing it the way she managed most things quietly internally, without burdening another person with a problem she hadn't yet confirmed was real. But she had promised herself the night she burned the letter that she was done carrying things alone out of habit. So she told him. She sat across from him in the ranch office with the account books between them, and she laid out exactly what Whittaker had said, and exactly what she believed he was planning in the same organized, factual way she would have presented a financial discrepancy. No drama, no hedging, just the information. Wyatt listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "How long has he had it out for you?" he asked. "Since I declined his interest 2 years ago," she said. It's not personal exactly. It's more that he's someone who doesn't accept a closed door. He'll keep looking for the hinge until he finds it. Or until he decides to take the door off entirely," Wyatt said. "Yes." He leaned back. "What does he actually want? Not from you. From this. What's the goal?" Clara had thought about this. "The ranch," she said, "or access to it. The Hargrove property borders his land to the east. If your finances are questioned, if there's any legal uncertainty about the property transfer, he's in a position to make an offer at a reduced price and frame it as rescuing a bad situation." She paused. "He's done it before. There's a family named Kellner, a widow who lost her property to him in exactly that way 3 years ago." Wyatt looked at her steadily. "And he thinks questioning the accounts is the way in." "It's clean," she said. "If it works quietly. No confrontation, no visible malice. Just a series of questions that gather momentum until they become an avalanche." Wyatt was quiet again. Then, "All right. What do we do?" She had expected him to ask what he should do. She had not expected we. The word sat in the room for a moment before she answered. "We make the accounts unassailable," she said. "Everything double-checked, everything cross-referenced, every transaction documented, with a paper trail that could survive a court review. If he sends someone to look, they find nothing. And then we wait because a man like Whittaker, when his strategy fails, he escalates. And escalation makes mistakes." Wyatt nodded slowly. "How long to make the accounts unassailable?" "If we work through this week," she said, "by Friday. Then we start today." He pulled the first ledger toward him and opened it. "Tell me what you need from me." She looked at him. This man who had listened to a threat against his ranch and his reputation, and responded by asking what she needed, and she felt something that she recognized finally for what it was. She was falling in love with him. She was falling in love with him, and it scared her half to death, and she was going to do it anyway. "Your purchasing records from the last 3 months," she said. "And the coffee." He stood up. "Coffee first," he said. "Agreed," she said. And they got to work. They worked 4 days straight, not all day practically, but every hour that was available between her running the shop and him running the ranch. She came each morning at 7 and stayed until mid-afternoon. He came to her shop in the evenings when the ranch work was done and sat at the back table while she closed out the day's accounts, going over documents with the focused patience of a man who understood that this work was right now the most important thing happening. On the third evening, somewhere past 9 o'clock, with papers spread across every surface, and both of them too tired to maintain the professional composure that the daytime hours required, something cracked open. It started simply enough. He made an error in a column. A small one easily caught, the kind of thing anyone does when exhausted, and she corrected it without comment, and he leaned his forehead into his hands and exhaled slowly. "This is not," he said, "the way I expected to spend my evenings in Montana." "What did you expect?" she asked, not looking up from her ledger. "Quiet," he said. "I expected quiet. I'd had enough of complicated. I came out here for simple." She did look up then. "And instead you got a fraudulent financial history, a predatory neighbor, and a woman the town considers damaged goods." The words came out more raw than she intended. She heard them land and felt the familiar reflex take it back, soften it, make it easier for him to not respond. But she didn't. She let them sit there. He lifted his head from his hands. He looked at her across the table. "Is that what you think I've got?" he said. "It's what I am," she said steadily. "Objectively, by the town's accounting." "Then the town's accounting is wrong," he said. "And you know better than anyone that wrong accounts can be corrected." She felt something shift behind her sternum. "Wyatt, Clara." His voice was quiet, and there was something in it she had not heard before. Not the careful deliberateness she had come to recognize, but something underneath that something unguarded. "I didn't come out here to have a simple life. I came out here to have the right one. There's a difference." He held her gaze. "You are the most capable person I have met in 15 years of building things. You see problems before they happen. You solve them before they land. You carry more than anyone around you realizes, and you do it without asking for anything in return." He paused. "That's not damaged. That's, I don't have a word for what that is. But it's not damaged." The room was very quiet. "You can't promise me certainty," she said, because she could not help herself, because she was constitutionally unable to let a beautiful thing stand without testing it. "About the future, about what it looks like." "No," he agreed. "I can't." "And that doesn't frighten you." I was quiet for a moment. Then, "Clara, the only thing that actually frightens me is the idea of building a careful, certain, uncomplicated life, and looking up at 50 to realize I built it with the wrong person, or no person." He looked at her steadily. "The uncertainty I can live with. The wrong person I can't." She looked down at the ledger. She looked at her hands on the paper. She thought about Thomas and the way he had trusted her. She thought about the letter and the ash and the fireplace. She thought about Margaret Holt saying selfish, and Mrs. Patton squeezing her hand, and Rosie saying, "Not everyone fights out loud." She thought about all of it, and she made a decision. "If this goes wrong," she said quietly to the ledger, not yet to him, "I need you to understand that it won't be the accounts. Whatever Whitaker does, whatever he finds, the accounts are clean. If this falls apart, it'll be something else." "I know," he said. Now she looked up. "Do you?" "Yes," he said. "And it's not going to fall apart." She held his gaze for a long moment. "All right," she said. Just that. All right. But between them at that table covered in papers with the lamp burning low and the Montana night pressing against the windows, it was enough. It was the kind of agreement that two people reach not with ceremony, but with the quiet mutual recognition that they have both decided to trust the same thing. They went back to the accounts. They were finished by Friday as she had promised. And the accounts were, as she had also promised, completely unassailable. Whitaker made his move on a Tuesday. Clara heard it from 3 different sources. Inside 45 minutes, a man from Whitaker's ranch had been seen going into the county land office with a stack of papers. There was a question being raised about the transfer of the Hargrove property. Something about the original deed, some irregularity in the documentation that Whitaker's lawyer claimed to have discovered. Clara was at the shop when she heard. She set down the supply order she was working on, took off her apron, told Rosie she would be back within the hour, and walked directly to the county land office. The man at the desk, a clerk named Patterson, who had worked in that office for 20 years, and had the expression of someone who had seen every variety of paperwork dispute and believed in exactly none of them, looked up when she came in. "Miss Whitmore," he said. "Patterson," she said. "I understand there's been a document filed this morning that questions the Dawson property transfer." "There's been an inquiry," he said carefully. "Nothing formal yet." "Can I see it?" He hesitated. "It's not standard procedure." "Patterson." She put her hands on his desk and leaned forward slightly. "I have been managing those ranch accounts for 3 months. I know every transaction, every record, every piece of documentation related to that property transfer. If there is a legitimate irregularity in that paperwork, I will find it myself and correct it before anyone has to go to the trouble of a formal dispute. And if there is not a legitimate irregularity," she held his gaze, Then both of us should understand exactly what this inquiry is actually about. Patterson looked at her for a long moment. He slid the inquiry document across the desk. She read it in 4 minutes. It claimed that a parcel boundary description in the original deed did not match the survey records, creating a potential overlap with the adjacent Whitaker property that would require resolution before clear title could be confirmed. Clara read it twice. Then she said, "This is based on an 1879 survey." That's what cited yes. There was a corrected survey filed in 1882, she said, by the county surveyor's office, correcting exactly the boundary discrepancy this claims to have found. The corrected survey is in the county records. Patterson blinked. "I'm not aware of—" "I'll wait," Clara said, "while you look." He looked. It took 11 minutes. He came back with a folder, and inside the folder was the 1882 corrected survey signed by the county surveyor, resolving the exact boundary discrepancy that Whitaker's inquiry had raised. Patterson set it on the desk between them and looked at it for a moment. "Well," he said. "Yes," Clara said. "Well." She left the land office with a copy of the 1882 survey and walked directly to the telegraph office, where she sent Wyatt a message. Whitaker filed an inquiry. "It's resolved. The boundary question was addressed by an 1882 survey already in county records. Come see me when you can." She walked back to the shop. She put her apron back on. She picked up the supply order where she had left off. Rosie watched all of this from behind the fabric counter with the expression of someone witnessing something they will tell their grandchildren about. "You were gone 52 minutes, Rosie said. "I said within the hour," Clara said. "You fixed it in 52 minutes. 52 minutes is within the hour, Rosie." Rosie was quiet for a moment. Then, "Miss Whitmore, you are the most terrifying woman I have ever met. I mean that as a very great compliment." Clara almost smiled. "Finish the supply order." Rosie finished the supply order. Wyatt arrived at the shop that afternoon at 3 o'clock. He came in fast, not running, but close to it, with the specific urgency of a man who has received a telegram that made him leave whatever he was doing and stopped on the other side of the counter. "Tell me," he said. She told him. All of it, the inquiry, the land office. Patterson's face, the 1882 survey. She told it the same way she told everything, organized, factual, with just enough detail to give him the complete picture. When she finished, he stared at her. "You walked into the land office," he said. "Yes." "By yourself?" Rosie was minding the shop. "Clara." He stopped. He looked at her with an expression she had not seen on him before, something between stunned and moved, with an undercurrent of something that might have been the beginning of fury at the situation, even as he processed her solution to it. You walked over there and pulled a 40-year-old survey out of the county records and ended a legal inquiry in under an hour. 52 minutes, she said. The survey was from 1882, so technically 23 years old. She paused. "Are you all right?" He stopped again, put his hand on the counter, looked at it. "Clara, that was my ranch, my livelihood. Something I've been building for months. And you walked across the street and defended it like it was already yours." The last 3 words landed between them very gently. Like it was already yours. Clara held his gaze. She thought about saying something careful, something measured, something that kept the appropriate distance that two people who have not made any formal declaration ought to maintain. Instead, she said, "It is. Whatever it is between us, whatever this is, that ranch is yours, and I'm not going to let someone take it from you. That's just who I am." The shop was absolutely silent. Wyatt looked at her for a long moment. Then he came around the counter. He stopped in front of her, and he took her face in both hands very carefully, and he looked at her the way she had stopped believing anyone would ever look at her again, like she was something irreplaceable, like she was someone who had been found rather than lost. Like she was not a woman with a difficult diagnosis and a difficult history, in a town that had decided her story was over, but a woman standing at the exact right beginning of something neither of them had names for yet. "Clara Whitmore," he said quietly. "Don't," she said, because she could feel everything in her about to give way. At once the whole careful architecture of composed survival. Don't make me cry in my own shop. He laughed a real laugh, short and surprised, and she felt it in her chest like something coming loose. All right, he said. He dropped his hands, stepped back, straightened. I won't. Thank you, she said. But I need you to know, he said, and his voice was back to that particular quiet deliberateness, the one she had learned to hear as his truest register, that this changes things, for me. What you just did, that changes things. She looked at him steadily. For me too, she said, because it had, because whatever she had been telling herself. This was professional, cautious, temporary, manageable standing in her own shop on a Tuesday afternoon, with a copy of an 1882 survey in her apron pocket. She understood that she had already stopped trying to talk herself out of it. She had stopped trying the night she burned the letter. She just hadn't admitted it until now. Outside Red Hollow continued its ordinary afternoon. People walked past the shop windows without stopping. The street sounds filtered through the door. The world was completely unaware that something had been decided quietly and without ceremony in the space between two people who had both learned the hard way that the things worth building took longer than expected and cost more than planned, but held, when they were real against everything, Whittaker would escalate. She knew that. A man like Charles Whittaker did not absorb a defeat gracefully. He had a lawyer, he had money, and he had the particular wounded pride of a person who had never been told no by someone he had underestimated. He would come again. And when he did, Clara thought she would be ready. She was always ready. That was the one thing this town had never managed to take from her. Whittaker waited 9 days. Clara counted them. She was not a woman who spent much time waiting for things she could not control. She had trained herself out of that habit in the long, quiet months after Thomas died. But this was different. This was a specific tactical waiting, and she recognized it because she had seen it before in account disputes and business negotiations. The pause before the second move. The silence that a calculating person uses to let the other side relax before they strike again. She did not relax. She kept the accounts in perfect order. She kept copies of every document in 2 separate locations. She told Rosie nothing beyond, "Stay alert," which Rosie interpreted correctly and immediately. On the 9th day, she found out what Whittaker had been doing with his time. She found out from Len Crawford of all people, the same man who had stopped Wyatt on the street 2 months earlier to warn him away. Len came into the shop on a Wednesday morning and bought a bag of coffee and stood at the counter with the particular discomfort of someone who has decided to do the decent thing and is not entirely sure it qualifies. "I want you to know something," Len said without preamble. "I don't agree with what Whittaker is doing." Clara set the coffee on the counter. "What is Whittaker doing, Len?" Len looked at his hands. "He's been talking to people, the other ranchers, men on the town council. He's been saying that Dawson's operation is financially unstable, that your management of the accounts is compromised, that a woman in your position with your circumstances can't be trusted to make objective decisions when she has a personal stake in the outcome." He met her eyes. "He's calling for a formal review of the ranch finances by an independent party. His independent party, his lawyer's recommendation." Clara was very still. "He wants to install someone he controls to review accounts he already tried and failed to discredit," she said. "That's what he wants," Len confirmed. "And who's listening to him?" Len was quiet for a moment. "More people than I'd like to say." Clara looked at him. The thing about Len Crawford was that he was not a bad man. He was a follower, the specific common variety of person who went along with the loudest voice in the room, not out of malice, but out of the particular laziness of moral cowardice. He had warned Wyatt away from her 2 months ago. He was standing in her shop now warning her about Whittaker. Both things were true, and neither one was enough. "Are you going to the town council meeting?" she asked. "Yes. And are you going to say any of this there or only to me in private?" He flinched, just slightly. "Clara, you know what he's doing is wrong," she said. "You just told me. The question is whether that knowledge stays in this room or goes somewhere it might actually matter." She held his gaze. "You have a choice, Len. You've always had a choice. Most people just find it easier to pretend they don't." He picked up his coffee. He left. Clara stood at the counter and breathed. Rosie appeared in the doorway from the back room. "I heard," she said. "I know you heard." "What are we going to do?" Clara straightened. She picked up her pen. She thought of the 1882 survey the land office Patterson's face when she handed it back to him. She thought of Wyatt saying it's not going to fall apart. She thought of every account she had ever untangled, every disaster she had ever organized into order, every time someone had looked at a mess and declared it unfixable, and she had simply sat down and fixed it. "We're going to go to that meeting," she said. Rosie blinked. You're coming with me." "Miss Whitmore, I'm 15. "You're 15 and you're remarkable, and I need a witness," Clara said. "Be at my door at 7. She told Wyatt that evening. He arrived at the shop at his usual time, read her face in approximately 3 seconds and said, "What did he do?" She told him. All of it. Len Crawford, the town council, the independent review, the plan to install someone Whitaker controlled inside the ranch accounts. Wyatt listened. He did not interrupt. When she finished, there was a silence that lasted long enough that she started to feel it. "He's not coming after the accounts," Wyatt said finally. "He's absolutely coming after the accounts." "The accounts are the vehicle," Wyatt said. "He's coming after you. He knows the accounts are clean, you made them clean, and he knows it. But if he can get a council review that questions your judgment, your objectivity, your character, then even clean accounts can be made to look suspicious. And if he makes you look suspicious..." He stopped. "Then he makes you look foolish for trusting me," Clara finished. "Then he separates us," Wyatt said flatly. "That's the goal. Not the ranch. Us." The word sat between them plain and serious. "He's that invested in this," Clara said. "A man like Whitaker doesn't lose twice." "Good," she said. 7 o'clock. Don't be late." The town council meeting was held in the main hall above the feed store, and by 7 o'clock it was already full. Clara had not expected that. She had expected the council members Whitaker and his lawyer, a handful of ranchers with something at stake. She had not expected what she found when she arrived. Nearly every person in Red Hollow who could walk to the building had apparently decided this meeting was worth attending. She could feel it as she came through the door, the particular density of a room that has arranged itself around an event, people standing along the walls, conversations stopping as she entered. Rosie at her left shoulder whispered, "There are so many people." "I see them," Clara said. Wyatt was at her right. He said nothing. He put his hand very briefly at the small of her back, not possessively, not dramatically, just the specific grounded touch of someone saying, "I am here," and then dropped it. Clara felt it all the way up her spine. Whitaker was already seated at the front, his lawyer beside him, with the comfortable posture of a man who has arranged the furniture of an event to suit himself. He looked at Clara when she came in. He smiled. She sat down 3 rows behind him between Wyatt and Rosie, and she smiled back. The council chairman, a rancher named Bill Aldous, who had known Clara since she first came to Red Hollow, called the meeting to order with the visible discomfort of a man who understood exactly what he was presiding over and would have preferred to be somewhere else. "We're here to discuss a formal request from Charles Whitaker," Aldous said, "regarding a proposed independent financial review of the Dawson Ranch accounts. Mr. Whitaker, you have the floor." Whitaker stood. How was good at this? Clara had to give him that. He was articulate, measured, and he had constructed his argument in the most reasonable-sounding possible terms. He spoke about financial transparency and community standards and the importance of clear records in ranch operations. He spoke about the personal relationship between the account manager and the ranch owner, and whether that relationship created a conflict of interest that the community deserved to have addressed. He never once said Clara's name. He never once said infertile or broken or damaged or any of the words the town had been using about her for months. He didn't have to. Everyone in the room knew exactly what he was saying. Clara sat completely still through all of it. Rosie's knee was pressed against hers. The girl was vibrating with the effort of staying quiet, and Wyatt beside her was the kind of still that Clara recognized as controlled, the stillness of a man who has decided precisely what he is and is not going to say, and is holding that decision together with both hands. When Whitaker finished, Aldous said, "Is there anyone who would like to respond?" Clara stood. The room made a sound, not quite a gasp, not quite a murmur, something in between. She heard it, and she let it pass through her, and she turned to face not Whitaker, but the room. The people who had been whispering about her since March, the women who said incomplete, and the men who said she had nothing to offer, and the neighbors who had decided her story was already finished. She looked at all of them. "My name is Clara Whitmore," she said. "Most of you know me. I've lived in this town for 3 years. I managed my husband's shop. I've kept records for 6 local businesses, and I've been managing the accounts at Dawson Ranch since February." She paused. "Mr. Whitaker is not wrong that there's a personal connection between myself and Wyatt Dawson. There is. I won't pretend otherwise." Another pause. "But I want to ask this room a question, a direct one." She looked at Whitaker. 2 months ago, you filed an inquiry with the county land office claiming a boundary discrepancy in the Dawson property deed. That inquiry was resolved the same day it was filed because the discrepancy you cited had been corrected by a county survey in 1882. A survey already in the public record that your lawyer should have found before filing. She turned back to the room. "The accounts Mr. Whitaker is asking to review have been audited by myself to the standard that would satisfy any court in this territory. Every transaction is documented. Every record is clean. There is nothing in those accounts that requires an independent review, because there is nothing in those accounts that would not survive one." She heard the room shift. "What Mr. Whitaker wants," she said, and she kept her voice completely even, "is not financial transparency. What he wants is to install someone he controls in a position that gives him access to information about a ranch that borders his property. A ranch he attempted to challenge through the land office and failed." She looked at him directly. "That's not a community concern. That's a personal one. And I think this room deserves to know the difference." The silence that followed was the particular quality of silence in a room full of people who have just heard a true thing said out loud for the first time. Whitaker stood. "Miss Whitmore," he said with the smooth precision of a man recalibrating in real time. "No one is questioning your competence. This is simply about maintaining community standards." "Then let me propose a community standard," Clara said. "If the council believes an independent review is appropriate, I will submit the complete Dawson Ranch account records to any qualified accountant. This council selects not Mr. Whitaker's selection the councils to review at their discretion. Full transparency. No conditions." She looked at Aldous. "I suggest that if the accounts pass that review, which they will, the question of any further inquiry is permanently closed." Aldous looked at Whitaker. Whitaker looked at Clara. And in that look, in the precise, unguarded half-second before he reorganized his expression, Clara saw something she had been watching for. He had not expected this. He had expected her to defend. He had not expected her to advance. "I find that proposal reasonable," Aldous said carefully. 3 other council members nodded. Whitaker's lawyer leaned toward him and whispered something. Whitaker's jaw tightened. "Mr. Whitaker," Aldous said, "the council may proceed as it sees fit." Whitaker said, which was not the same as agreeing, but it was the most he could do without looking like exactly what he was. Clara sat down. Wyatt said nothing. He looked straight ahead, but his hand resting on his knee turned palm up beside her, quiet, invisible to anyone else in the room just there. She pressed 2 fingers against his palm. Just briefly. Just enough. Outside, after the meeting, in the chill of the Montana evening, people came to her. Not all of them. Not even most of them. But more than she had expected. Mrs. Patton found her first gripping her arm with both hands and saying nothing. Just gripping firmly, her silence louder than any speech. A rancher named Cole, whose books Clara had managed for 2 years, shook her hand and said the council review would find nothing, because there was nothing to find, and everyone with sense knew it. A woman named Agnes, who had been one of the whisperers, who had used the word incomplete, in a way Clara was almost sure Agnes knew she had heard, came up to her with a look on her face that was not quite an apology, but was as close as someone like Agnes could get. "That was well said," Agnes said. "Thank you," Clara said, without heat, without the satisfaction of "I told you so." She had learned these past months that when a person who hurt you comes partway back, you don't punish the partial distance. You take what's offered, and you let the rest go. Agnes nodded and moved away. And Clara watched her go, and thought about what it meant that she could do, that let it go, and felt the particular quiet pride of a person who has changed without losing themselves. Rosie appeared at her elbow. "You were extraordinary," she said. "I was organized," Clara said. "Same thing," Rosie said. Wyatt came up behind her. He waited until Rosie drifted toward Mrs. Patton, and then he said very quietly, "You didn't tell me you were going to do that." "I didn't know I was going to do that until I stood up," she said. "The proposal for the independent review. The accounts will pass," she said. "We both know that." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "That's not what I meant." She looked at him. "You just in front of every person in this town," he said. "You stood up and told them there's something between us. By name. In public." Clara held his gaze. "Is that a problem?" "No," he said. And the word came out with a speed and certainty that answered more than the question she'd asked. "Good," she said. He looked at her for a moment, and she looked back at him, and between them passed something that did not require words. The specific grounded understanding of two people who have been tested and are still standing on the same side. "Let's go home," he said. And the word home, unspecified mutual belonging to no particular location, landed exactly right. Charm. The council's independent review took 12 days. Clara spent those 12 days working. She kept the shop running. She kept the ranch accounts in order. She kept her expression calm and her hands busy and her thoughts as much as possible on the practical and away from the waiting. Rosie helped without being asked. Wyatt came every Thursday, and some Thursdays were now also Fridays, and neither of them commented on the pattern changing. On the 7th day, something happened that had nothing to do with Whitaker. Len Crawford came back to the shop. He came in at mid-morning on a Thursday when the shop was quiet, and he bought nothing and said nothing for the first minute, which was unusual enough that Clara set down what she was doing and waited. "I spoke at the council meeting," Len said finally. After you left, I asked to say something." She had not known this. "What did you say?" He cleared his throat. "I said that I've been in this town 20 years, and I know what it looks like when a person does good work and gets punished for being too good at it. I said that whatever personal opinions people had about Miss Whitmore's circumstances, those opinions had no bearing on whether her accounts were honest." He was looking at the counter. "I said I was embarrassed that it had taken me this long to say it." Clara was very still. "Len," she said. "I'm not looking for thanks," he said quickly. "I should have said it weeks ago, months ago. I should have—" He stopped, started again. "I said things to Dawson, about you, early on. I want you to know that I understand now that I was wrong." The room was quiet. Clara thought about what it cost a man like Len Crawford, a man who had spent 20 years being whatever the room needed him to be, to come in here and say that. It was not nothing. It was in fact something that required a kind of courage he had not previously demonstrated. "Thank you," she said, simply, without ceremony. He nodded. He put his hat on. He left. Clara stood at the counter for a moment after the door closed. Then she thought people can change. She had known that abstractly. She had believed it in theory. But watching it happen, watching Len Crawford, of all people, find the particular courage of a specific concrete public apology, she felt it settle into something more than a belief, something like evidence. People could change, which meant perhaps that a town could change, which meant that what she had said at the council meeting, that she was not going to let other people's verdict on her become her verdict on herself, was not only personal. It was in some small way instructional. She was not sure she was comfortable with that. But she thought about it for a long time. The review came back clean, exactly as she had said it would. The accountant the council had appointed was a man from the county seat named Breckett, who had the particular no-nonsense efficiency of someone brought in to do a job and not interested in local politics. He spent 4 days with the records. His report presented to the council on a Monday morning was 8 pages long and concluded in one paragraph. The accounts of Dawson Ranch, as managed by Clara Whitmore, were accurately kept, thoroughly documented, and reflected no evidence of irregularity, conflict of interest, or mismanagement. 8 pages of detail to say she was right. Aldous read the report at a council session and then looked at Whitaker, who was seated in the front row with his lawyer, and the particular expression of a man absorbing a loss in public. "I think that concludes this matter," Aldous said. Whitaker said nothing. His lawyer said nothing. They left before the session was formally closed. Clara was not at the meeting. She heard the outcome from Wyatt, who came to the shop that afternoon with the report in his hand and set it on the counter in front of her and waited. She read the final paragraph. She set it down. She pressed her hands flat on the counter and looked at them. "Okay," she said. "Okay," Wyatt repeated. "I'm not going to cry," she said, "so I'm saying okay instead." He laughed, the same short, surprised laugh she had heard the night in the shop, the one she felt in her chest. He reached across the counter and covered her hands with his. "Okay," he agreed. She thought it was over. She was wrong. Because Whitaker, as she had told Wyatt, was not a man who absorbed a closed door. He was a man who looked for the hinge. And the hinge he found the move that Clara had not anticipated, the twist she had not seen coming. The thing that arrived on a Wednesday morning, 12 days after the clean review, and rearranged everything, came not through the accounts, not through the land office, not through the council. It came through a lawyer's letter. A formal legal claim filed in the county court. Not a financial dispute. A property dispute, but a new one, a different one. One that had nothing to do with the boundary question from the 1882 survey. The claim alleged that a specific section of the Dawson Ranch, approximately 40 acres on the eastern edge, including the primary water source for the cattle operation, had been verbally promised to Whitaker by the previous owner Hargrove as partial compensation for a debt. The claim alleged that this verbal agreement, while never formally documented, constituted a binding commitment. It alleged that Dawson had purchased the property with knowledge of this encumbrance. It alleged that Whitaker was owed either the 40 acres or the monetary equivalent of the original debt, an amount that according to the filing was enough to cripple a ranch that had only just become financially stable. Clara read the letter 3 times at the kitchen table of her house at 7 in the morning, with her coffee going cold beside her. She set it down. She picked it up again. She read the specific amount claimed. She put it down again and looked at the wall for a long moment. Then she put on her coat and walked to the ranch. Wyatt had already received his copy by the time she arrived. He was at the desk in the ranch office, the letter in front of him, and when she came in, his face told her he had been sitting there long enough that the first shock had settled into something more concentrated. "Verbal agreement," he said. "With no documentation," she said, "which is convenient." "Very." She sat down across from him. "What do you know about Hargrove's debts to Whitaker's?" "Nothing. When I bought this property, the title search came back clear. No liens, no encumbrances, no documented obligations." "Documented," she said. "Clara." He looked at her directly. "Are you asking me if I knew about an undocumented agreement with Whitaker?" "No," she said. "I'm asking you if there's any possibility that Hargrove mentioned anything during the sale negotiations that could be interpreted as acknowledgement of such an agreement." Howe was quiet for a moment. She watched him search his memory with the specific, careful look of a man going back through a conversation he hadn't known he'd need to remember precisely. "No," he said finally. "Nothing." "Are you certain?" "I'm certain." He held her gaze. "Clara, tell me straight, can he win this?" She looked at the letter. She thought about what she knew about verbal contract law in the territory, which was not as much as she needed to know, but more than most people would have. She thought about the 40 acres. She thought about the water source, the primary water source for the cattle operation, which meant that without it, the ranch was not an inconvenienced operation, but a fundamentally non-viable one. "If a court believes Hargrove made that agreement and that you had constructive knowledge of it," she said, "then yes, he could win a monetary judgment. Whether he could take the land depends on how the court interprets the nature of the alleged commitment." She paused. The fact that there's no documentation works both ways. He has nothing to prove the agreement existed, but you have nothing to prove it didn't. It's his word against a dead man's, Wyatt said. And dead men can't contradict you in court, Clara said. The room was very quiet. He planned this from the beginning, Wyatt said. It was not a question. He planned it as a contingency, Clara said, in case the accounts review failed, which it did. So now he moves to the next thing. She looked at the letter. He is very patient and very calculated, and he has significantly more resources than either of us. She said it plainly because she believed Wyatt deserved the plain version, not the softened version, not the version that left out the hard part. He absorbed it. Then, what do we need? We need anyone who had direct knowledge of Hargrove's financial dealings with Whitaker, she said. A witness to the alleged agreement or a witness to the absence of it. We need Hargrove's records, any records he kept outside of the official account books. And we need a lawyer, a good one, not from this county where Whitaker has connections. The records, he said. I went through everything when I bought the property. There were papers in the barn, the office, a trunk in the back room. Did you go through the trunk? He stopped. She watched his face. I went through the papers in the trunk, he said slowly. I didn't. There were letters at the bottom. Personal correspondence. I didn't read them because they weren't account records. Clara looked at him. He stood up. The trunk is in the storage room, he said. Then we should look at those letters, she said. They found the trunk. They opened it. At the bottom, under 3 years of personal correspondence and one very old Bible, was a bundle of letters tied with a piece of twine. And in the third letter of the bundle, dated October 1880, written in Hargrove's loose and slightly erratic hand, was a sentence that made Clara go very still. She read it once, read it again, looked up at Wyatt. Read this, she said, and handed it to him. He read it. His expression changed. The letter was from Hargrove to his brother, written in 1880. A personal letter, a family letter, the kind that documented private truth, precisely because it was never intended to be documentation. In it, Hargrove described a dispute he was having with his neighbor Whitaker over a debt that Whitaker claimed Hargrove owed him. The letter said in Hargrove's own hand, Charles keeps saying, I promised him the east pasture. I said no such thing. What I said was that if I ever sold that land, I would give him first offer. That is not the same as a promise, and it is not the same as a debt, and I will not let him tell the story differently. I will not let him tell the story differently. Wyatt set the letter down. He looked at Clara. He was lying, Wyatt said. Whitaker. He took something Hargrove actually said first offer if the land sold and turned it into a verbal agreement. A promise. A debt. Yes, Clara said. And Hargrove knew he was doing it. Yes. And Hargrove wrote it down. In a personal letter to his brother, Clara said, which makes it admissible as a contemporaneous written statement. It's not a formal record. But in a court hearing, a dispute about what was or wasn't said, it's evidence, real evidence. She looked at the letter. We need to find Hargrove's brother. Can we? He wrote the letter, Clara said. He exists. And if he has more correspondence from Hargrove about Whitaker, any documentation of the ongoing dispute, then Whitaker's case doesn't just weaken, it collapses. Wyatt looked at her steadily. She could see him processing not just the letter, not just the legal implication, but something else. The larger thing. He did this to Hargrove, Wyatt said. This same move. The rewritten story, the claimed agreement. He drove Hargrove to the point where the man sold and left rather than fight. Yes, Clara said. I think that's exactly right. And then he tried the same thing on the widow Kellner, the one you mentioned. Yes. He does this, Wyatt said. This is what he does. He finds people who are already struggling, and he adds enough pressure that they'd rather sell and go than stay and fight. He looked at the letter. He picked the wrong man this time. He also picked the wrong account manager, Clara said. Something moved across Wyatt's face, not quite a smile, but the thing underneath a smile, the foundation of it. He looked at her across the trunk, across the bundle of letters, across everything they had built in the last months, and everything that was now being tested by a man who thought pressure and patience could defeat people who had already survived both. "I'll find Hargrove's brother," Clara said. "I have his name from the letter. I'll use the telegraph. Give me 3 days." 3 days, Wyatt said. She tied the bundle back with the twine, set it on the desk in the ranch office, and looked at it. She thought, this is not over. Not close to over. She thought he will try something else even after this. He will push again from another angle with another calculation. And she thought, let him. Because she had been a woman, this town had buried. She had been a woman, a doctor's letter had tried to reduce to a single sentence. She had been a woman that Margaret Holt called selfish, and Doris Callahan called finished, and Charles Whitaker called a convenient weapon. And she was still here, still standing, still fighting, and not alone. This time, not alone anymore, with a man beside her who had looked at the whole complicated, uncertain, beautifully unresolved truth of her, and said you, and meant it completely. Whitaker had picked the wrong fight. He had picked it with a woman who had already survived everything else. She found Hargrove's brother in 3 days exactly as she had promised. His name was Edmund Hargrove, and he lived in Billings, a 2-day ride east, where he ran a small, but apparently successful grain supply business. Clara located him through a combination of telegraph inquiries to the Billings post office and a letter she had written to the county recorder's office asking for any forwarding address connected to the original Hargrove property sale. The recorder's office responded within 48 hours with an address. Clara sent a telegraph to Edmund Hargrove that same afternoon. His response came the following morning, and it was 4 words long. I have more letters. Clara read those 4 words, standing at the telegraph office counter, and she felt something unlock in her chest. Not relief exactly. Not yet, because relief required certainty, and they were still a long way from certain, but the particular forward momentum of a problem that has found its angle. She went directly to the ranch. Wyatt was at the fence line when she arrived, working with 2 of his hands on a section that had come loose in last week's wind. He saw her coming and excused himself and walked to meet her, reading her face before she spoke. Edmund Hargrove has more letters, she said. Wyatt was still for a moment. How many more? He didn't say. He said more. Can he come here? I asked. He said he could be in Red Hollow within the week if it was necessary. I told him it was necessary. She paused. I also told him what Whitaker had claimed the nature of the legal filing the alleged verbal agreement. He telegraphed back within the hour. What did he say? He said, and I'm quoting directly, Charles Whitaker is a liar, and my brother told me so in writing. Wyatt looked at her. He's coming, Clara said. Good, Wyatt said. We still need a lawyer, she said. Someone outside this county. I've been thinking about that. There's a man in Helena, his name is Garrett Fossey, who handled a property case 3 years ago that set a precedent on verbal contracts in Montana territory. I read about it in the County Legal Digest when the case was decided. He won on the basis of contemporaneous written evidence contradicting an oral claim. Wyatt stared at her. You read the County Legal Digest. I read everything, she said without apology. The point is that Fossey knows this specific legal ground. He's argued it before a territorial judge and won. If we can get him to take the case... Send the telegraph, Wyatt said. Today. I already sent it, she said. He looked at her for a long moment, with the expression she had learned to read as his most unguarded one. The look that said he was seeing her clearly, and finding that the clear view was still somehow more than he had expected. You sent it before you came here, he said. I sent it before I came here. Clara. He said her name the way he always did, but this time there was something in it, a fullness, an accumulated weight of everything the name had come to carry between them. What would I have done without you? Probably lost the ranch, she said. He laughed. She did not. She was too focused, too tightly wound by the logistics of what still needed to happen, but she felt the laugh in her own chest anyway, warm and certain. All right, he said. What do we do while we wait? We document everything, she said. Every interaction with Whitaker, every filing, every inquiry, every letter. We build the timeline. And we prepare for the hearing, because a man like Whitaker, when he understands his legal case is weakening, will try to settle on terms that favor him before it gets to court. She looked at him directly. When he offers to settle, and he will, we don't. Agreed, Wyatt said without hesitation. Even if the terms seem reasonable on the surface, she said. Even if his lawyer makes it sound like the practical choice. Clara. His voice was steady and sure. I trust your judgment on this completely. Whatever you tell me we should do, that's what we do. She held his gaze for a moment. She thought this is what it feels like to be trusted completely. She had felt it once before with Thomas, but Thomas had trusted her the way a man trusts someone he loves warmly and wholly, but sometimes without fully understanding what he was trusting her with. Wyatt trusted her the way a man trusts a partner specifically based on evidence with his eyes fully open. It was a different thing. She was beginning to understand its own kind of love. Then let's get to work, she said. Garrett Foss responded to her telegraph on the second day. I was interested. He would need to review the relevant documents before committing, but the nature of the case. A verbal contract claim, contradicted by contemporaneous written evidence was, as he put it, directly within his area of experience. He listed his fee, which was substantial, and which Clara calculated against the ranch's current financial position, with the focused efficiency of a woman who had been balancing impossible numbers for years. It was manageable. Just barely, but manageable. She wrote back the same day, send your terms. We accept. She told Wyatt the fee. He nodded once. Worth it. Yes, she said. It is. Edmund Hargrove arrived on a Thursday, 5 days after his first telegraph on the afternoon stage from Billings, and Clara was at the stage stop to meet him, because she had learned over months of managing difficult situations that the first impression of a witness mattered enormously, and she wanted to make sure Edmund Hargrove's first impression of Red Hollow was not Charles Whitaker. How was a smaller man than she had expected, with his brother's same loose, slightly erratic energy, but channeled differently. Where Hargrove had apparently been chaotic, Edmund was contained, precise, and very clearly angry. Not the hot anger of a man making a scene. The cold, gathered anger of a man who has been waiting a long time to say a true thing. He shook her hand with both of his. Miss Whitmore, he said. You have no idea how glad I am to be here. I have some idea, she said. How many letters? 11, he said. 11 letters from my brother over 4 years, all of them mentioning Whitaker. 6 of them specifically discussing the alleged debt and the alleged promise. He patted the bag over his shoulder. Every single one of them says the same thing my brother said in the one you found. Whitaker took something my brother said, a courtesy and offer of first consideration if the land ever sold, and built a story around it, until my brother could not keep fighting the story. That's what he does, Clara said. That's what he does, Edmund agreed. And I've been carrying these letters for 2 years waiting for someone to need them. Clara looked at him. Why didn't you come forward when your brother sold? Why didn't you fight it then? Edmund's expression shifted, something complicated moving across it. Guilt and grief and the particular weight of a decision made in hindsight that still aches. Because my brother asked me not to, he said quietly. He was tired. He said fighting Whitaker cost more than the land was worth, and he just wanted to go. I respected that. I've regretted it since. She let that sit for a moment. You're here now, she said. I'm here now, he agreed. She brought him to the ranch. Wyatt shook his hand and thanked him, and made coffee, and the 3 of them sat at the table in the ranch office, the same table where Clara had first untangled Hargrove's financial disaster. What felt like a different lifetime ago, and they went through all 11 letters together. By the time they had finished 2 hours later, the picture was complete, and it was damning. 4 years of documentation in Hargrove's own hand, telling the same story in different ways. Whitaker claimed a debt that did not exist, transformed a courtesy into a promise, and used the accumulated pressure of that false story to wear a man down until he ran. And now he was trying the same thing again, with a new man on the same land, using the absence of documentation to rebuild the fiction that Hargrove's own letters destroyed. He's going to know, Wyatt said, looking at the letters spread across the table, As soon as his lawyer hears that Edmund is here, that this case is over. Yes, Clara said. So he'll try to settle before it gets to the hearing. Within the week, she said. Probably within the next 3 days. And we don't settle, Wyatt said. We don't settle, she confirmed. Because if we settle, it stays private. There's no record. He takes what he can extract from the negotiation, and he goes looking for the next property and the next person he can do this to. She looked at Edmund. Your brother settled and left. The widow Kellner settled and left. If we settle, the next person fights this alone. Edmund looked at her steadily. Then we don't settle, he said. It was that simple. That settled. The settlement offer came on a Tuesday, 4 days after Edmund's arrival, exactly within Clara's predicted window, and it came from Whitaker's lawyer, in the form of a formal written proposal. Wyatt would grant Whitaker a permanent easement across the eastern 40 acres in exchange for Whitaker dropping the legal claim. No money would change hands. No fault would be admitted. The matter would be resolved quietly and privately, and everyone would walk away with something. Wyatt read it, handed it to Clara. She read it without expression and set it on the desk between them. The easement gives him legal access to the water source, she said. It's not the 40 acres, but it's access to what the 40 acres contains. In 2 years, maybe 3, he files a new claim based on the easement argues adverse possession or some variation and gets the land anyway. She looked at Wyatt. It's a slower version of the same move. We decline, Wyatt said. We decline, she agreed. She wrote the response herself. It was 4 sentences long. The final sentence said, We look forward to presenting our evidence at the hearing. She sent it. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out, before a circuit judge named Alderman, who traveled the territory on a quarterly basis and had the reputation of a man who did not suffer poorly constructed arguments. Garrett Fossey arrived from Helena 6 days before the hearing, reviewed everything. Clara had assembled the letters, the timeline, the account records, the land office documents, and looked at her across the table when he was finished. This is exceptionally well organized, he said. I'm aware, she said. He almost smiled. Whitaker's legal team is good. They're going to lean on the absence of formal documentation of the alleged agreement, argue that the letters are personal correspondence, not legal records, and that the absence of the alleged verbal agreement in the formal property records doesn't prove the agreement didn't exist. But the letters prove Hargrove disputed Whitaker's characterization of what was said, Clara said, in writing, contemporaneously. Yes, Fossey said. And Edmund Hargrove can testify to their authenticity and to the conversations his brother shared with him directly. He looked at the stack of letters. The question is, the judge. If Alderman applies the standard from the 83 precedent, the contemporaneous written evidence creates a presumption that favors Dawson. If he applies a narrower standard, he'll apply the 83 standard, Clara said. Fossey looked at her. What makes you certain? Because Alderman wrote the 83 decision, she said. I looked it up. Fossey looked at her for a long moment. Miss Whitmore, he said. You are either the most prepared person I have ever worked with or the most alarming. Possibly both. Probably both, she agreed. What else do we need? 6 days before the hearing, Clara got sick. It started as exhaustion. Bone deep, unusual exhaustion. The kind that did not respond to sleep, the way exhaustion was supposed to. She had been running on compressed energy for months, managing the shop, managing the ranch accounts, managing the legal preparation, managing the 10 different versions of fear that came with loving something and watching someone try to take it. She had not been sleeping enough. She had not been eating at regular hours. None of that was unusual for her. She had managed on less for longer, but this felt different. She was tired in a way that was specifically physical in a way that after a week began to feel specific. She ignored it. She had too much to do. The hearing was 6 days away. Fossey needed her for preparation. Wyatt needed her to focus. There was no time to be tired in a way that meant anything other than tired. She ignored it for 3 days. On the 4th day, she was standing at the back counter of the shop, going through a supply manifest, and she had to sit down. Rosie was there immediately. She had the particular radar of someone who had spent months paying close attention to another person, and she appeared at Clara's elbow before Clara had fully registered that she was sitting. "What's wrong?" Rosie asked. "Nothing," Clara said. "Miss Whitmore." "I'm tired, Rosie. It's been—" "You're not just tired," Rosie said, with the directness of a girl who had decided at 15 that the time for delicacy was after she'd said the true thing. "You've been tired before. This is different. When did you last eat a full meal?" Clara thought about it. She could not immediately remember. "Yesterday," she said uncertainly. "It's Thursday," Rosie said. "You haven't had a full meal since Monday at least. I've been watching." She crouched down to be at eye level with Clara, which was such an unexpectedly adult gesture from a 15-year-old that Clara felt something loosen in her chest. "Is there any possibility," Rosie said carefully, "that this is something other than tired?" Clara looked at her. She thought no. She had been told very clearly in a letter she had burned in a doctor's verdict she had accepted that this particular possibility was unlikely. She had reorganized her future around that verdict. She had made peace with it, rebuilt herself around it, and then found something worth building toward anyway. She was not going to let herself hope for something the doctor had already said was unlikely. "No," she said. But her voice, she noticed, came out slightly uncertain. Rosie looked at her steadily. "You should see the doctor." "The hearing is in 6 days." You should see the doctor before the hearing," Rosie said. "Because if something is wrong, you need to know. And if something is not wrong exactly—" She paused, choosing her words with unusual care. "Then you also need to know." Clara looked at her. Rosie looked back with the expression of someone who has already thought through both possibilities and is not afraid of either. "Fine," Clara said. "Tomorrow." "Today," Rosie said. "I'll mind the shop." Dr. Henley had a new office. Now he had moved from the cramped room above the hardware store to a larger space on the main street, which meant his waiting room had actual chairs. Clara sat in one of those chairs for 11 minutes counting before he called her in. How was a careful man. He had been her doctor since she first came to Red Hollow, and between the examination 3 years ago and the letter he had sent her, and the months of watching the town use his medical opinion as a social weapon. There was a particular careful quality in the way he looked at her now, the way a person looks at someone they feel they owe something to without knowing exactly how to pay it. He listened to what she described. He asked questions with the precise economy of a good doctor. He conducted the examination in the thorough, unhurried manner of someone who understood that the result mattered, and rushing it would not serve anyone. When it was over, he sat down across from her and looked at his hands for a moment. Clara sat very still. She had promised herself she would not hope. She had kept that promise mostly for the last 4 days. She was not keeping it right now. "Clara," Dr. Henley said. He looked up. "My assessment 3 years ago was made in good faith with the information I had and the medical knowledge available to me. I want to say that clearly before I say anything else." "All right," she said. Her voice was steady. Her hands folded in her lap were completely still. "The assessment was not wrong exactly," he said. "The complications I identified were and are real. The likelihood I described was accurate based on what I could determine. But medicine is not mathematics. Unlikely is not impossible, and the human body is more," he paused, "more stubborn than our predictions sometimes account for." Clara was not breathing. She was aware of not breathing, but she could not seem to correct it. "You're pregnant, Clara," Dr. Henley said. The room was completely silent. "Early," he said. "Very early. There will be considerations, precautions. Your situation means we should be careful, more careful than a typical pregnancy, and I want to discuss all of that with you. But the pregnancy itself is—" He stopped. "It is real and it is there, and I am not uncertain about it." Clara looked at him. She looked at her hands. She looked at the wall. She thought about the letter. The word unlikely 3 times in 4 sentences. The careful, cramped handwriting of a man who understood that ink on paper could do permanent damage. She thought about the fireplace, the ash going up the chimney. She thought about Wyatt saying, "I'm not building it on an exception." I'm building it on you. She thought about all of it, and she felt something move through her that was so large and so unexpected that she could not find the edges of it. Not happiness exactly. Not yet, because happiness was too small a word for something this seismic. More like the feeling of a structure that has been under pressure for so long that when the pressure releases, the whole thing doesn't know immediately whether to stand or to fall. It stood. She sat in that chair in Dr. Henley's office in Red Hollow, Montana, in 1884, and she let the thing stand. "Thank you," she said. Her voice came out rougher than she intended, scraped thin, with the effort of containing something that did not want to be contained. "I owe you a better accounting than I gave you 3 years ago," he said. "I'm sorry, Clara, for the letter and for everything that letter became." She looked at him. She thought about what it had cost her. The months, the whispers, the word broken, and the word selfish, and the word damaged, and all the other words that letter had set loose in this town, like stones thrown into water, the ripples spreading further than he had intended or imagined. "What's done is done," she said. She did not say it bitterly. She said it the way she said most true things, plainly, because the plain version was the most honest and the most useful. "Take care of yourself," he said. "Come back next week. We have a great deal to discuss." "I will," she said. "After the hearing." He blinked. "The Whittaker hearing?" "Yes." "Clara in your condition." "I am not missing that hearing," she said. "I have spent 6 months building the case that wins it. I will be there. After it's over, I will rest." She stood. "Book me for the week after." He looked at her for a long moment, with the expression of a man who understood he was not going to win this argument. "The week after," he agreed. She told Wyatt that evening. She had meant to wait to find the right moment, the right words, the right setting, all the things that a moment like this supposedly required. But she was also Clara Whitmore, and Clara Whitmore had learned the hard way that waiting for the perfect moment to say a true thing usually meant the true thing went unsaid. She came to the ranch after the shop closed. Wyatt was at the table going over the hearing preparation documents with Fossey. She stood in the doorway for a moment, and Fossey looked up and read something in her face. He was a perceptive man. It was what made him a good lawyer, and said smoothly that he needed to check something in his notes and would be back in 20 minutes. He left. Wyatt turned to look at her. "What happened?" he said. Then sharper, "Are you all right?" "I saw Dr. Henley today," she said. She watched his face, watched the understanding move across it, not slowly, not with drama, just a clean shift from concern to attention. "And," he said. His voice was very quiet. "And," she said, "it appears that Dr. Henley's original assessment was not the complete picture." The room was completely still. "Clara," he said. "I'm pregnant," she said. She had thought on the walk over about how to say it. She had considered several formulations, careful ones, hedged ones that protected her from the full weight of the moment if he reacted in a way she had not anticipated. She had discarded all of them. Plain was best. Plain was always best. He stared at her. She stood in the doorway with her hands at her sides, and she did not perform anything, not joy, not fear, not the elaborate emotional theater that moments like this sometimes demanded from women in order to make the men around them comfortable with the size of their feeling. She was just Clara, standing in a doorway, telling the true thing. He stood. He crossed the room in 4 steps, and he pulled her into his arms with the specific, uncomplicated urgency of a man who has stopped calculating and is just acting, and she felt the full, solid warmth of him, the realness of him, and she pressed her face against his shoulder, and she let go of the thing she had been holding. She did not cry in public. She had a strict policy about this. But this was not public. This was Wyatt in the ranch office, in the room where she had sat across from him for months and built something from nothing. She cried. Not long, not dramatically, just fully briefly, with the particular quality of a woman releasing something she has been carrying for a very long time, in a space where it is finally safe to set it down. He held her through all of it. He said nothing. He did not rush her or reassure her with words that would have been too small for the moment. He just held her. When she was done, she straightened. She stepped back. She wiped her face with the back of her hand and looked at him. "The hearing is in 4 days," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he laughed full real, the laugh that she felt in her own chest. "Of course it is," he said. "Are you all right?" she asked. He stopped. He ran his hand through his hair. He looked at her with the expression of a man who has just received news so large that his ordinary vocabulary has temporarily failed him. "I'm more than all right," he said. He stopped again. "Clara, you and I are going to have to work on your timing." "My timing is fine," she said. "The hearing is in 4 days. We win the hearing, then I rest, then we discuss the rest." She looked at him steadily. "Unless you'd like to rearrange the order." "No," he said. He met her eyes. "That order is correct." "Good," she said. "But Clara." His voice shifted back to that particular quiet deliberateness. "We are going to talk about what this means. All of it. Not after the hearing. After the hearing, and after you've rested, and after." He stopped himself, reorganized. "Soon. We are going to talk soon." "Yes," she said. "We are." She looked at him. He looked at her. Between them was everything that had built over these months: the accounts, the council meeting, Edmund's letters, the hearing preparation every Thursday and some Fridays. The night he said, "You," and she felt the architecture shift, and underneath all of it, now something new. Something that changed the shape of the future in a way she had stopped being able to imagine. 4 days, she said. 4 days, he confirmed. She went back to Fosse's documents. He sat down beside her. They worked until midnight, the two of them side by side at the table that had seen so many of their important moments, building the final argument for the hearing that would end one thing and allow another to begin. The morning of the hearing read hollow turned out. Clara had not expected that either, and yet she should have, because she had stopped being surprised by how much this town paid attention to things it had originally dismissed. They came ranchers and shopkeepers, and the women from the church social, and Len Crawford, and Agnes and Mrs. Patton, who had apparently told 3 people she would be there, or God help them, and they filled the courtroom that the circuit judge had taken over from the town hall for the day, and they sat and they watched. Whitaker arrived with his lawyer, and the particular careful composure of a man who was still even now not willing to show uncertainty. Edmund Hargrove arrived with his bag of letters, and the cold gathered anger that had not diminished since Billings. Garrett Fosse arrived with Clara's documentation. Every page organized, every argument sequenced, the kind of preparation that only happens when someone who is very good at their work cares very deeply about the outcome. Clara arrived with Wyatt beside her. She sat in the front row behind the plaintiff's table. She was wearing her best dress, not because this was a social occasion, but because she had decided standing in front of her mirror that morning that she was going to look like exactly what she was, a woman who had won. Judge Alderman, as it turned out, was precisely what his reputation suggested: direct, impatient with theater, and in possession of the particular focused intelligence that Clara recognized immediately as the kind that reads documentation carefully and knows what it means. Whitaker's lawyer went first. His argument was constructed well and delivered confidently. Verbal agreements were binding under territory law. The alleged promise had been made and acknowledged, and the absence of formal documentation reflected only the informal nature of frontier business arrangements, which the court understood and recognized. Counsel Judge Alderman interrupted. "Are you aware of the Hargrove correspondence introduced by the defense?" A pause. "We are aware, Your Honor, that certain personal letters have been submitted, however. Have you read them?" Another pause. Shorter, but its shortness said everything. "We have reviewed them, Your Honor." "All 11? "Yes, Your Honor." "Then you're aware that in the third letter dated October 1880, the deceased property owner explicitly contradicts the characterization of his statement as a promise or debt, and characterizes it instead as an offer of first consideration." Alderman looked at the lawyer over the top of his reading glasses with the expression of a man who has heard every variety of legal argument and is not interested in this one. "Please continue." Clara sat completely still. Beside her, Wyatt exhaled slowly. She pressed 2 fingers against the back of his hand, the same way she had at the council meeting. Quiet, invisible enough. Fossey's presentation of the defense case took 45 minutes. He was precise. He was organized. He cited the 1883 precedent, Alderman's own precedent, on contemporaneous written evidence. He presented Edmund Hargrove's testimony on the authenticity of the letters and the conversations he had directly with his brother over 4 years of dispute. He presented the complete clean account records. He presented the original property transfer documentation with the 1882 survey attached. When he sat down, the courtroom was very quiet. Whitaker's lawyer attempted a rebuttal. Alderman let him speak for 7 minutes before he held up one hand. "I've heard enough," the judge said. The room went very still. The claim brought by the plaintiff requires the court to accept that a verbal agreement existed, was binding, and was known to the defendant at the time of purchase, Alderman said. The contemporaneous written evidence introduced by the defense, authored by the previous property owner himself, directly contradicts the characterization of the alleged verbal commitment as a promise or debt. The weight of this evidence, combined with the absence of any formal documentation of the alleged agreement in the property records, is insufficient to establish the claim to the standard this court requires. He looked at Whitaker directly. Judgment for the defendant. The legal claim against the Dawson Ranch property is dismissed. Court costs to the plaintiff. The room took a breath. And then it exhaled. Mrs. Patton made a sound that was not quite a word, but communicated everything. Len Crawford put his hat in his lap and looked at it. Agnes pressed her hand over her mouth. Rosie, who had positioned herself in the second row, gripped the back of Clara's seat with both hands. Whitaker stood. His lawyer said something quiet to him. Whitaker looked at the judge. He looked at Wyatt. And then finally, he looked at Clara. She met his gaze without performance, without triumph or heat or any of the emotions that this moment probably warranted. She looked at him the way she looked at a closed account, completely factually, with the understanding that it was finished and did not require anything further. He looked away first. He collected his lawyer and his papers, and he walked out of the courtroom, and Clara watched him go and thought he will leave this town. Not today. Not because he has to, but because a man like Charles Whitaker does not stay in a place where his story has been publicly and permanently corrected. He will go somewhere else and find a different angle and try his version of this same thing with someone else. She could not prevent that. But she had prevented it here. That was enough. Foss was shaking Wyatt's hand. Edmund Hargrove was being thanked by Wyatt with the genuine, substantial warmth of a man who understood exactly what those 11 letters had meant. Len Crawford had gotten to his feet and was making his way forward with the particular determined expression of a man committed to doing the right thing, even when the moment for it has technically passed. Clara sat in her seat for a moment longer. She put her hand quietly over her stomach. She thought about all of it. The letter she had burned, the ash going up the chimney, the months of building from broken ground, the accounts and the surveys and the council meeting and the trunk in the storage room, and Edmund's 4-word telegraph, and Wyatt's hand turned palm up beside her at the council meeting and the doctor's office, and the word pregnant, and the way Wyatt had crossed the room in 4 steps. She thought about the woman who had walked home from Dr. Henley's office 14 months ago, pressing a folded letter into her apron pocket, believing her story was already finished. She had been so wrong. The story was not finished. The story was only now in this courtroom on this morning, with all of these people, and all of this evidence, and all of this love, she had not planned and could not have predicted beginning. She stood. She smoothed her dress. She turned to find Wyatt already looking at her from across the room, the way he had been looking at her since the beginning, like she was the answer to a question he had not yet fully asked, but was getting closer to every day. She walked towards him. He met her halfway. "It's over," he said. "This part," she said. He understood what she meant. "Yes," he said. "This part." Around them, the courtroom was alive with voices and movement, the specific energy of a community that has watched a fight end and is not quite sure yet what comes next. Mrs. Patton found her way to Clara and held both her hands. Rosie appeared at her elbow and said nothing, just stood close, which was its own language. Len Crawford shook her hand and said, "Well done," and meant it, she could tell. Edmund Hargrove kissed her knuckles in the old-fashioned way and said his brother would have liked her very much. Clara stood in the middle of all of it and felt for the first time in as long as she could remember the specific peace of someone who is exactly where they are supposed to be. Not because the world had given her what she expected, because she had stayed and fought and refused to let the story end on anyone else's terms. And the world, stubborn, unpredictable, more generous than its reputation, had given her something greater than anything she had planned. She rested for exactly 4 days. That was as long as she could manage before the stillness started costing her more than the work had. Clara Whitmore was not built for horizontal surfaces and quiet rooms. She was built for problems, the kind with numbers and angles, and people who needed something organized from chaos, and lying in bed listening to Red Hollow go about its ordinary business outside her window was its own particular agony. On the 5th day, she got up, made coffee, and sat at her kitchen table with a blank ledger page and began writing down everything that needed to happen next. Not the ranch accounts, not the legal aftermath of the hearing, though there were loose ends there that Fossey had promised to tie up before he returned to Helena. Not even the shop, though Rosie had been managing it alone for 4 days and deserved both a raise and an apology. She was writing down everything that needed to happen for the rest of her life. It was a long list. She was halfway through it when Wyatt knocked on her door. He came in when she called, looked at the table, looked at her, and sat down across from her without a word. He poured himself coffee from the pot she had already made. He looked at the list. "You've been resting," he said. "Completely," she said. "That's 4 days of rest right there," he said, nodding at the list. "I was lying down while I thought of it," she said. "That counts." He looked at her with the expression she had learned to read as exasperated affection, the specific look of a man who has accepted fully and without reservation that the woman across from him is never going to be entirely manageable, and has decided this is one of the things he loves most about her. "Dr. Henley said rest," he said. "Dr. Henley also said unlikely," she said. "His track record is not perfect." Wyatt looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up the coffee and drank and said, "What's on the list?" She turned it toward him. He read it. His expression moved through several things: recognition, amusement, and then something that settled into something softer and more serious when he got to the bottom. "You put the wedding on the list," he said. "It needs to happen," she said. "It's a task like any other task. It needs to be organized." "Clara." He set down the coffee. "I haven't actually asked you." She looked at him. "You haven't not asked me either." "That's not the same thing." "No," she agreed. "It isn't."
I was quiet for a moment. Then he stood up from the table, not dramatically, not with ceremony, just deliberately, the same way he did everything. And he came around to her side and he crouched down so they were at eye level, and he looked at her with the complete unguarded version of his face that she had come to understand was the rarest and most valuable thing he had. "Clara Whitmore," he said, "will you marry me?" She looked at him for a moment. She thought about the first time he had come into the shop and taken his hat off before he was fully through the door. She thought about the coffee at the desk placed where it would not touch the papers. She thought about palm up beside her at the council meeting. She thought about 4 steps across the room. "Yes," she said, "obviously." He laughed. She did not. She was smiling, which for Clara was the equivalent of anyone else laughing. He stood up and pulled her up with him and held her the same way he had in the ranch office, the same solid certainty of it, and she let herself be held without performing composure or monitoring her own reactions or any of the 50 protective habits she had spent 14 months building. She just stood there and let it be real. "The wedding goes at the top of the list," he said into her hair. "It was already at the top," she said. "I ordered the list by priority." He held her tighter. The wedding was 3 weeks later on a Saturday morning in late June, and it was nothing like what Red Hollow expected. The town had been waiting for a wedding with performance in it, the kind of ceremony that announced something, that gave the gossips material, that rewarded the months of speculation with a spectacle worth discussing. What they got instead was Clara and Wyatt, 12 guests, and Bill Aldous reading the service in his capacity as town magistrate, because Clara had decided at some point in the organizational process that the fewer people who had opinions about this day, the better. Rosie was there. Mrs. Patton was there. Edmund Hargrove had stayed in Red Hollow longer than planned, which surprised everyone, including himself, and he was there too, standing in the back with a handkerchief he needed twice. Len Crawford came, which Clara had not invited but had not forbidden either, and he stood straight and quiet through the whole thing and shook Wyatt's hand afterward with what appeared to be genuine feeling. Margaret Holt was not invited. That was deliberate, not out of cruelty. Clara had moved past cruelty as a response, but out of the clear-eyed understanding that some people belong in your past because that is where the relationship always lived. Margaret had told her she was selfish for accepting Wyatt's love. There was no version of that which belonged in the room where they got married. Agnes was invited and she came. That was deliberate too. The service itself was short. Aldous read what needed to be read. They said what needed to be said. Wyatt held both her hands and looked at her the way he always looked at her, and she held his hands and looked back, and between them passed the complete unspoken history of everything it had taken to get to this specific morning, this specific room, these specific words. When it was over, Mrs. Patton cried. Rosie did not. She stood with her arms crossed and her chin up and the compressed pride of a young person who has been present for something important and knows it. Edmund Hargrove used the handkerchief both times openly and without apparent embarrassment. Clara signed the register in her clear, precise handwriting. Clara Dawson. She looked at it for a moment. Then she thought no. She picked up the pen again and wrote below it in the smaller letters, formerly Whitmore. She looked at what she had written and she thought about Thomas in the shop and the ledgers and the life she had built from the wreckage of his death, and she felt the particular complicated completeness of a woman who carries more than one chapter and does not pretend otherwise. Wyatt was reading over her shoulder. He saw what she had written. He didn't say anything. He put his hand over hers on the pen briefly, and that was the whole conversation, and it was exactly right. The pregnancy was, as Dr. Henley had warned, complicated. Not dangerously, not in the way that required crisis or catastrophe, but in the ongoing, persistent, attention-demanding way of something that required Clara to do the one thing she was worst at, slow down. She did not slow down gracefully. She slowed down the way she did most difficult things, with deliberate, organized effort and significant internal resistance. Wyatt helped. Rosie helped. Dr. Henley helped by being honest with her in a way he had apparently decided he owed her, speaking plainly about what was necessary and why, without the gentle euphemisms that had characterized their previous difficult conversation. She appreciated the plainness. It was the language she spoke. There were mornings that were hard. There were afternoons when the exhaustion was so total that she sat at the back counter of the shop and accepted that she could not move for 20 minutes, which was its own private battle for a woman who had made motion and productivity her armor against the world. There were nights when fear moved through her, not the abstract fear she had lived with for months, but the specific physical fear of someone who is carrying something irreplaceable and knows exactly how fragile irreplaceable things can be. On those nights, Wyatt was there. He had moved into the house, their house now, the one she had lived in alone for 2 years, which he had offered to buy a larger one, and she had refused because she had made this house hers with her own 2 hands, and she was not leaving it for anything. And on the nights when fear was louder than reason, he would get up without being asked and make tea and sit at the kitchen table with her while she talked herself back to solid ground. He never told her everything was going to be fine. She would not have believed him if he had, and he knew it. Instead, he said things that were true, that she was strong, that she was careful, that Dr. Henley was paying close attention, that they were doing everything right. True things. Small, specific, true things. She loved him for that most of all. One night in August, about 4 months into the pregnancy, when the fear was particularly loud and she had been sitting at the kitchen table for an hour, before she heard him get up, she said something she had been carrying for a while. "I'm afraid," she said when he sat down, "that I've built this whole future now, and something will go wrong and take it." He looked at her steadily. "I know." "That's not reassuring," she said. "You didn't ask to be reassured," he said. "You asked to say it out loud." She looked at him. He was right. She had exactly that. "Say it all," he said. "Everything you're afraid of. Say it out loud so it's not just inside you." She looked at her hands. She thought about it. Then she said, "I'm afraid of losing the baby. I'm afraid of something being wrong with the pregnancy that Dr. Henley hasn't found yet. I'm afraid of all the things I can't control, and I am very bad at things I can't control." She paused. I'm afraid that I've been given more than I was prepared for, and I won't know how to hold it. The room was quiet. That last one, Wyatt said. That's the real one. Yes, she said. Clara, he leaned forward, arms on the table. You have been holding more than you were prepared for since before I met you. You held your husband's illness and his death and your grief and your shop and your neighbors and your town and a doctor's verdict and 14 months of people telling you your story was finished. He held her gaze. You've been holding everything. This is not more than you can carry. This is just more than you expected. She looked at him. More than I expected, she repeated slowly. And you've always been better at unexpected than you give yourself credit for, he said. The 1882 survey, Fosse, Edmund, the council meeting. The corner of his mouth moved. Me. She felt something release in her chest, not the fear, not entirely, but the weight of carrying it alone. You, she said, are unreasonably calm for a person whose life has been this complicated this year. I'm calm because you handle the complicated parts, he said. She almost laughed. She was getting better at almost laughing. That is not a fair division of labor. You're right, he agreed. I'll make the tea more often. She did laugh, then a real one short, and surprised the kind she had been giving him more frequently since the wedding, since the courtroom, since all of it. He looked at her with the expression she loved most on him, the one where he was watching her be happy, as if it was something worth paying close attention to. Better, he said. Better, she said. They sat at the kitchen table until 2 in the morning, drinking tea and talking about the ranch and the shop and names, which turned into its own extended, occasionally heated conversation that resolved nothing except that they both had opinions and would continue to have them. And by the time she went back to bed, the fear had not disappeared, but it had shrunk back to a manageable size. That was what he did, would eliminate the hard things, make them the right size. The twist that nobody expected. Not Clara, not Wyatt, not Dr. Henley, not Rosie, who had been paying attention to everything since February, came in October. It came at the shop on a Wednesday afternoon, which seemed like the right place for the most important things in Clara's life to happen, because the shop was where most of them had. She was behind the counter going through the fall inventory when the door opened and a woman walked in that Clara had never seen before. 50s, well-dressed in a practical way, with the particular bearing of someone who has traveled a long distance and is not going to let it show. She looked around the shop with the assessing eye of someone who has spent time in a great many shops and knows what a well-run one looks like. Clara Dawson, the woman said. Yes, Clara said. My name is Ruth Hargrove, the woman said, Edmund's wife. He's told me so much about you that I came to see it for myself. She paused. I hope that's not alarming. It's surprising, Clara said. Not alarming. Sit down. Ruth sat. She accepted the coffee Clara poured without ceremony, which was its own form of compatibility test that Ruth apparently passed. She looked at Clara over the rim of the cup with the expression of a woman who says direct things and expects the same in return. Edmund has decided to stay in Red Hollow, Ruth said. Clara set down her own cup. I didn't know that. He told Wyatt yesterday. He wanted to tell me in person first. Ruth looked around the shop again briefly and then back. He says this town needs someone who understands what Whitaker did to his brother and can recognize it if something similar tries to happen again. He says Miss Whitmore, Mrs. Dawson, built something here that deserves protecting. Clara was quiet for a moment. Edmund doesn't need to stay on my account. He's not staying on your account, Ruth said. He's staying because he watched a woman stand up in a courtroom and do the thing his brother couldn't, and it reminded him that some places are worth fighting for. She set down her cup. We're buying the old Henderson property. Edmund has plans for a grain operation. I have plans for several things. She looked at Clara with clear, direct eyes. I thought you and I should meet. Clara looked at her. She thought about the last year, Wyatt coming through the door, the accounts, the council meeting, Edmund and his 11 letters, the hearing, the wedding, the kitchen table at 2 in the morning. She thought about all the people who had appeared in her life when she had stopped waiting for rescue and started building something worth finding. I think that's a good idea, Clara said. Ruth nodded once with the satisfaction of a woman who has confirmed something she already suspected. Good. Now tell me about the Henderson property. Edmund thinks the land is sound. I want a second opinion from someone who knows this territory. Clara reached for her ledger. I'll tell you everything I know, she said. The baby came in February. She came the way most important things in Clara's life arrived, not on schedule, not in the way that had been planned for, but real and complete and entirely worth every complicated thing that had preceded her. Dr. Henley was there, focused and careful, speaking to Clara in the plain language she had asked for. Wyatt was there. He had been there for 12 hours before it was over, and he was still there at the end of it, holding her hand with both of his and saying the true things, the small, specific true things that were his native language and her most reliable comfort. When it was over, when the sound of a new voice entered the world, and Dr. Henley said everything he needed to say, and Wyatt looked at the baby with an expression that had no language for it, just a man's face, completely undone, completely new. Clara lay back and breathed. She looked at the ceiling. She thought, I burned that letter. She thought the ash went up the chimney. She thought the woman who pressed that letter flat in her apron pocket and walked back into the shop and helped the next customer. That woman believed her story was already finished. That woman was carrying 14 months of grief and a town's cruelty and a doctor's verdict. And she still tied on her apron and went back to work because she refused to let the ending be written by anyone but herself. Wyatt put the baby in her arms. She looked down. She felt something she did not have a name for. Not happiness, which was too small, and not relief, which missed the point, and not triumph, which was the wrong shape entirely. Something that did not need a name. Something that was simply real in the way that only the most important things are the things that do not require you to explain them to yourself, because your entire body already understands. Hello, she said to the small face looking up at her. The baby was unimpressed by the introduction. She was focused on existing, which was reasonable given how recently she had started. Wyatt sat on the edge of the bed beside Clara. He looked at the two of them. His face was still the undone version, the open version she had learned to read as his rarest and most honest register. She looks like you, he said. She looks like a baby, Clara said. She doesn't look like anyone yet. She looks like you, he said again, with the certainty of a man who has decided. Clara looked down at the baby. She thought maybe. She thought, I hope so. She thought if she grows up to look like her mother, I hope what that means is that she grows up to know her own worth before anyone else decides it for her. I hope she is stubborn and precise and good with numbers and better with people than she thinks she is. I hope she ties her apron on and goes back to work on the hard days. I hope someone looks at her one day the way her father looks at her mother, like she is the answer to a question worth asking. She looked at Wyatt. We still haven't agreed on a name, she said. He almost smiled. We have time. We have 20 minutes before Rosie arrives and I lose control of the conversation, Clara said. That girl has been composing naming opinions since September. Wyatt laughed. It filled the room, that laugh, the full real version, the one she felt in her own chest every time. She loved that laugh. She had loved it since the first time she heard it in the shop, when she had told him she was absolutely not going to cry. And he had been so surprised and pleased by the specific way she said it. She loved him. She loved this room and this child and this life that she had built from ground that everyone else had called too broken to grow anything. Eleanor, she said. He looked at her. Eleanor Ruth, she said. Ruth for Edmund's wife, who had appeared in the shop in October and become quickly, inevitably, in the way of people who are simply compatible. One of the most important friendships of Clara's life. Unless you have a different view. He looked at the baby, at Clara, back at the baby. Eleanor Ruth Dawson, he said. Yes, she said. That's perfect, he said. It was. Spring came to Red Hollow, the same as always, with mud and cold mornings, and the particular restlessness of a place that has been still too long. Clara was back at the shop by April, not full days, not yet, but mornings, which was where the important work happened. Rosie, who had been managing the shop through the winter with a competence that had stopped surprising Clara months ago, greeted her first morning back with coffee already made and the accounts already organized, and the expression of someone who had been holding a post and was very glad to have the commanding officer return. Everything is in order, Rosie said. I know it is, Clara said. You're the one who kept it in order. Rosie stood a little straighter. I want to talk to you, she said, about the future, about what I want to do with my life. Clara looked at her. Rosie was 16 now, nearly 17. And the girl she had hired at 15 to do inventory and keep quiet had become something Clara had not planned for a genuine partner, a person whose intelligence and instincts she relied on in the specific way she relied on very few people. Sit down, Clara said. Rosie sat. I want to learn everything, Rosie said with the directness that Clara had always loved in her. Accounts, business, law, if I can. I want to understand how you do what you do, how you see a problem before it arrives, and know which angle to approach it from. She looked at Clara steadily. I want to be able to do what you did at the land office, what you did at the council meeting. I don't want to need someone to rescue me. I want to be the person doing the rescuing. The room was quiet. Clara looked at this girl who had said not everyone fights out loud, and the answer to a question he hasn't asked yet, and you are the most terrifying woman I have ever met. I mean that as a great compliment, and she felt the specific grounded recognition of a person seeing something she understands completely. Then I'll teach you, Clara said. Rosie let out a slow breath. Just like that. What did you expect? I don't know, Rosie said. Something harder. It is going to be hard, Clara said. It's going to be the hardest thing you've ever done, and people are going to tell you along the way that it's too much for you or too complicated or that you're not the right kind of person for it. She held the girl's gaze. You're going to ignore all of that and keep going anyway. Rosie nodded, slowly then firmly. Starting Monday, Clara said. Starting Monday, Rosie agreed. She stood to go back to work, and then she paused and turned back and said, in a voice that was trying to be casual and not quite succeeding, Miss Whitmore, Mrs. Dawson, can I say something? You always say what you're going to say regardless, Clara said. But yes. Rosie looked at her with the expression she had been wearing since the council meeting, since the hearing, since all of it, the compressed, contained pride of a young person who has watched someone they love do something remarkable and is still processing the full weight of it. This town called you broken, Rosie said, and you came in here every day and opened the ledgers and kept the accounts and helped every person who asked and fought every fight that needed fighting, and you did it all before any of the good things happened. You did it when there was no reason to believe the good things were coming. She paused. I want you to know that I know that, and I think it's the most important thing I've ever learned from watching anyone. Clara looked at her. She thought about the girl who had appeared at her door at 15, quiet and observant, and far more intelligent than anyone had yet told her. She thought about everything Rosie had absorbed just by paying attention about worth and fighting and what it means to build something in ground that other people have written off. She thought this is also what I was building. Without knowing it, this was also part of the work. Go open the ledgers, Clara said. Rosie went, A year after the hearing, Charles Whitaker left Red Hollow. He sold his property to a family from Wyoming who had no history with anyone in the territory and no interest in the old disputes that had defined the Whitaker name in this particular corner of Montana. He left quietly without announcement on a Tuesday morning when most of the town was occupied with its ordinary business. Clara heard about it from Ruth Hargrove, who heard it from the land office, which was also where the Whitaker property sale had been formally recorded. Clara received this information at the shop counter, set it next to the supply order she was working through, and said, All right, Ruth, who was by then a frequent presence at the back table of Whitmore Trading. She had a head for inventory and a ruthless efficiency with numbers that Clara admired completely looked up from her own paperwork. That's all. What else would there be? Clara said. I don't know, Ruthie said. Satisfaction, celebration. The man spent most of a year trying to destroy everything you built. He failed, Clara said. That's the celebration. She picked up her pen. Does Edmund need the timber account reconciled before the end of the week? Ruth looked at her for a moment with the expression that had become familiar. Over the months of their friendship, the look of a woman who has a great deal of respect for another woman's composure and also finds it slightly exasperating. Yeah, she said. End of the week. Then I'd better get on with it, Clara said. She got on with it. The last time someone in Red Hollow called Clara Dawson broken, it was a stranger, a man passing through on his way to somewhere else who had heard a version of the old story at the saloon, the stripped-down, distorted version that had been circulating since the beginning. He came into the shop on a Friday morning and looked at Clara across the counter and said with the careless authority of someone who doesn't know they're walking onto someone else's history, You're the one they say can't have children. Clara set down her pen. She looked at him. Behind her in the small room off the main floor that had once been storage and was now 3 days a week in a classroom where Rosie Dunbar learned accounts and business law and everything else, Clara knew how to teach. She could hear Rosie go completely still. I have a daughter, Clara said. She is 3 months old and her name is Eleanor Ruth, and she is currently at home with her father, who is building something from broken ground the same way I did, and she will grow up knowing her worth before anyone else gets the chance to tell her otherwise. She held the man's gaze without heat, without performance. You may have heard a story about me. I recommend going back to whoever told you and letting them know the story has a different ending than they think. The man looked at her for a moment. He bought a tin of tobacco. He left. Rosie appeared in the doorway. She was holding a pencil and a ledger, and the expression she had been wearing since the council meeting, since the hearing, since Clara had said, not the broken version, not the rumored version, not the town's version, her own. Perfect, Rosie said. Close the ledger, Clara said. We have work to do. Rosie closed the ledger. She sat down. She picked up her pen. And Clara Dawson, formerly Whitmore account manager, business owner, fighter wife, mother teacher, the woman this town had tried to bury and failed, opened the books and went back to work. Not because the world had finally given her permission, because she had never needed it. She had only ever needed herself and the stubborn, specific, unbreakable knowledge that her story belonged to no one else, that her worth was not a verdict. Other people could deliver that. The ground everyone called too broken to build on was in fact exactly the ground she had chosen. And she had built something extraordinary on it, something that stood, something that lasted, something that would outlive every whisper, every letter, every closed door, every person who had looked at her circumstances and confused difficulty with defeat. Clara Whitmore had walked into a doctor's office and received a sentence she was supposed to accept. Clara Dawson had looked that sentence in the eye and refused. That was the whole story. That was always the whole story. The woman they called broken had simply been waiting for the moment to show them what broken people actually build. And when that moment came, she built something so solid, so real, so completely and unapologetically hers, that Red Hollow stopped calling her broken altogether. They called her instead by her name, and her name was more than enough.